Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Delicious things to eat.
The popcorn can't be beat. The sparkling drinks are just dandy. The chocolate bars and the candy. So let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
I'm a fan of classic movies.
During the spookiest time of the year, there are a few guidelines all ghosts and goblins should follow. Always stay on sidewalks. Never go to a stranger's house. And never go out alone.
I'm the boogeyman! And I'm coming to get you! You know nothing of hell. Fear flicker.
I'm tired of living in fear.
I'm back!
New to the neighborhood.
Trick or treat!
Trick or treat!
If you are thinking of seeing this film alone, don't.
Julia, let's get this show on the road.
Hello and welcome to Overlapping Dialogue, a podcast of double features dedicated to programming the finest, most eclectic, and downright bizarre film pairings and cataloging the discussions that ensue. We're your gruesome twosome, Kyle and Levi Huffman. I'm Kyle.
I'm Levi.
And here we are, smack dab in the middle of episode 83. This time, also on Poltergeist and The Sixth Sense, following up last time on Vampire and Isle of the Dead. We're still in Spooktober Spooktacular, Levi. How's this Spooktober getting ready to shake out?
Well,
for you?
it's been going really quickly, and by the time you listen to this, it'll be about overall rating. It'll be kind of Halloween weekend. It's seen the end of soccer season for me, and so that's been a great experience, but also a big time commitment. And so now that that's over, I guess I'm gonna try to prioritize watching more movies again and doing things, watching some more TV, and all the things that we talk about on this podcast. So.
Right on.
We did not end up going to the Charlotte game last night for Charlotte FC, where Messi played the entire time, which was an assumption we had that he would not, based on the fact that he can't play on turf.
No, I really don't want to be one of these people. Yeah. We might have talked about this last time. I don't remember. That decries athletes, and athletes just need to shut up and play. I'm not one of those people. But at the same time, it's like you're getting paid a multi-million-dollar contract. Like, come on.
Well, and I think that was part of the contract. I think it wasn't as much him as it was his agent and the contract. From what I was explaining.
If that's true, then that's
But anyway, he ended up doing it. So, but he didn't score any. I think he scored one they did an offsides on. But anyway, we were literally going to go until yesterday morning when we're recording this anyway, which is the day of, and they had been sold. Mm-hmm. Which is good because I need a little bit of money back. So
there you go.
I'm drowning. So because of my own self, but
So that's that.
Throwing my weight around, if you know what I mean. No, just kidding. That was weird.
But let's again, both our movies today, Poltergeist and The Sixth Sense, both ghost stories. Mm-hmm. Both kind of
ghost tales.
Ghost tales even. In their own way. Yeah,
the real Veggie Tale, but ghost version.
Yeah. Right. Correct.
Okay.
And what I like about both of them, kind of separately but also together, is they're both obviously ghost stories, and they both are in their own ways. Even Poltergeist, even more explicitly, a horror film. one could argue and get into the weeds about whether The Sixth Sense is or not. Some people have described it more as a supernatural thriller. But I really like that, both are ghost stories, but they're not absolutely the scariest things you could ever see. They're pretty accessible to a grand variety of people. Again, Poltergeist is pretty aesthetically intense in moments, but it's still like a PG horror movie, which is in of itself is kind of a novelty and a strange thing to talk about that movie, which we'll get into. And of course, The Sixth Sense, as you were saying earlier, kind of surprised it's not rated R. It is actually PG-13, right? So just because that's considered this almost adult drama / supernatural thriller / horror movie that got all this acclaim.
Horror movie ever made or whatever.
Got a lot of acclaim, made a lot of money. But again, these are both really high quality ghost stories that are not like shock fests, but I think that that speaks well of both movies. So, but before we get into those, we gotta pull up a chair and open that chomper there, buddy. It's time
and umpire this meal.
The Blue Plate Special.
Hi, Audrey. Norma, have a cup of coffee, please. Sure.
I'll have what she's having.
Hey, who wants to watch pepperoni? Coming up!
Come on, Blue. You got to have a better meal than that. Come on, Blue. As they say at the Hickory Crawdads games.
The Crawdads.
You can be a better cook than that, Blue.
The Crawdaddies. So we're going to talk about...
All right, let's get ready for Levi to piss everybody off. All right, let's go.
A new movie, an older movie, and then a show that's kind of both old and new to us at the same time, as we'll talk about. Old. I'll say that. Yeah. The big ticket item for us today, though,
gonna piss you off,
is Killers of the Flower Moon, which we were lucky enough to see in the theater, which I feel like this... We talked about this in a while back.
I called it Dolby and not Big D.
This is getting a bigger theatrical release than initially I think the plan was, but in large part due to the writer's strike is formally over now, but actors are still striking. That opportunity actually led for this to be seen in a little bit of a bigger way. I'm not exactly sure, obviously, what the box office is going to be, but it seemed like it had, presumably had a pretty good weekend, especially for what it is. Of course, Killers of the Flower Moon is the latest Martin Scorsese movie. As it's deemed on Wikipedia, an American epic revisionist Western crime drama. That's a lot of hyphenates almost there. This is an adaptation of a David Grann book also called Killers of the Flower Moon, which I've actually heard mixed things about. There's people in my life, even some coworkers that I had, who had read it and couldn't even finish the book, said the book wasn't even all that good. Then I heard other people say the book was good, so I can't speak to the book itself.
I don't care. Yeah. Either way, just being honest, I'm not going to read it. So
now, this did not have as long of a pre-production and as arduous of a development, I don't think, as The Irishman did, because that took place over quite a while. Of course, it's a new Martin Scorsese movie, so that alone makes it an important event. This is also a big deal that not only that it has Leonardo DiCaprio in it, not only does it have Robert De Niro, but they're together. That's the first time that's ever happened in a Scorsese movie. We can talk about what that means later. Also, an actress we've been a big fan of for quite a while now, Lily Gladstone, effectively is kind of part of the leads of this movie. I think both of us most remember her from Certain Women, of course, the terrific Kelly Reichardt movie. As far as what the movie's about, as it says here on Wikipedia, its plot centers on a series of Oklahoma murders in the Osage Nation during the 1920s, committed after oil was discovered on tribal land. Also, another thing to mention about this, we talked about Robbie Robertson recently. This was his final film score, which in and of itself feels like a big deal. Also, I forgot, this movie was actually supposed to come out last year, but it got delayed.
Because it feels like the production of the movie has been gestating for a long time. Like, I remember the picture, the moment. Everybody keeps that was, the picture for a long time, was first shown like years ago. I feel like now.
At least a year, maybe 2 years ago. I can't remember.
Well, it would have to be because it was supposed to come out at Christmas of last year, I think, and then they.
Yeah, it says here that Scorsese and DiCaprio were attached to the film in 2017. Production initially expected to begin in early 2018. Several pushbacks and delays in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Scheduled to commence in February 2021, with Apple TV confirmed to finance and distribute the film alongside Paramount. It shot between spring and fall of 2021. And again, like I said, it's supposed to come out last year.
Well, and this will get to a point that I'm going to make later. But it seems to me, with his movies, that there's all this import, production-wise. Like, we know about what movie he's going to make way before it's necessary. Yeah. And so it feels like the production cycles of his movie just go on and on and on and on and on. Mm-hmm. And, which I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It doesn't matter. I just feel like it's a lot more dedicated to that.
Well, there's a lot
Plus, he makes movies that are so long and would have both arduous and pre- and post-productions, too.
Yeah.
So
another thing is, too, I think...
That go on for a while.
And this has been true for quite a few years with him, going back decades now. There's always several things on the stove, and so it's like in development,
like
various
similar,
periods of development. Spielberg also in the same way. He's not primarily a writer-director, so it's not like everything's going to get... The next
in
thing,
2 years, George
thing.
Lucas is going to visit a new food court somewhere. And by the way, that is not me making fun at all.
Yeah,
I just want to be clear.
Now he actually co-wrote this screenplay. It's co-credited with him and Eric Roth, who's of course a big Hollywood screenwriter. It also says that this movie has a $200 million budget, which is reportedly the largest amount ever spent on a film shot in Oklahoma. So big deal for Oklahoma that this got made. It premiered at Cannes. I think we mentioned that way back when. Has been getting a pretty rapturous critical reception, which again we'll see how the box office does for it. Nonetheless, similar to The Irishman, which got a much more limited theatrical release. It was Netflix, The Irishman paid for by Netflix, ultimately released by Netflix. This, as we said, was funded by Apple TV, kind of theatrically distributed by Paramount, but ultimately this is going to live on Apple TV for forever, so it's seen as this long-term investment for them. A lot of preamble, but Levi, what did you yourself
do you want
think
to start
of
first?
Actually, yeah, and Levi wrote a really terrific little review that I'm going to link to in the description for this episode. Actually, funny enough, I ran into a kid who used to go to Ford. I didn't have him in my class, but he knew who I was, and his face looked vaguely familiar. His name is the Film Pope on Twitter, Instagram. So feel free to follow the Film Pope. He's actually got quite a bit of followers. Anyways, he himself is a cinephile. He's young, and he was excited about the idea that this was the first Martin Scorsese movie he'd ever seen in theaters. And that got me thinking about, what was mine? And mine would have been Shutter Island way back in 2010. And I've seen practically all of them since then, other than The Irishman.
Mine would have been Hugo of all movies.
Yeah, that would have been a year later in 2011.
I guess I saw Silence.
2021, excuse me.
Yeah.
No, 2011, excuse me. Yeah, and then Silence. So, and that made me think about, that the last act of Scorsese's career in a roundabout way, I've been able to see most of his movies theatrically. And I feel really blessed that we were able to see this movie theatrically in the Dolby, get the full experience of that. And my overwhelming thought about this movie, and there's a lot of things to get into. I'll go ahead and say I like the movie more than Levi, although I do have caveats as well.
And I did like the movie. Let me make that clear, first of all. So,
but I guess the biggest, most overwhelming thing for me was was just a sense of gratitude that this movie was even allowed to exist in any form. That somebody of Scorsese's age is able to get a budget this high and to make a movie of this size and of this length and of this depth. And despite quibbles we're going to have with it, and I'm going to have my own as well, I'm just really grateful that this was able to happen. And then also, it's a nice little bookend to Scorsese's career that, as I said, it's frankly a big deal that DiCaprio and De Niro are finally in a movie together in Martin Scorsese's filmography. And also that this allowed, him to dip into the world a little bit of the Western, although you had some really thoughtful things to say about that, which I'll let you get into here in a little bit. But it's really just a lot of parts of Scorsese's career starting to take shape and in a way that seems obviously like a culmination. We all know that he doesn't have all that many films left. And so this movie in of itself, the size and the depth and the width of it, in of itself was impressive. And while I did have some problems that, again, I'll get into here in a little bit, I really just admired that it was allowed to breathe and be the size that it was. As far as the structure of the movie, I felt like especially the first hour, the first act was among the strongest stuff in it. The whole production design and living in a world that was at once brimming with a future ahead, but also gleefully stuck in the past is something that I really loved in terms of its depiction of 20s era Oklahoma, which feels like a lot of eras and cultures slamming into each other all at once, and so I really admired that. I did feel the last act in this especially was the greatest hits of Scorsese's other movies. And in many ways a mirror image for a lot of things he's done with regards to gangster movies and crime dramas. In superior movies, ultimately, I think, to this. Especially just The Irishman felt like such a love letter and a brutal goodbye at the same time to that kind of structure for him that it felt odd to kind of run it back and try to do some aspects of that again. I almost wonder if, I know this movie struggled a long time in terms of what it was, in terms of a script, in terms of a story, because originally it was going to be the Tom White comes to Oklahoma and solves the murder, basically was what the movie was originally going to be. And DiCaprio was originally going to play the role that Jesse Plemons played. Oh. And I think, this is a random place to say, I think Leonardo DiCaprio as a film star deserves a lot of credit because there are now stories with Scorsese and now with Tarantino. And obviously Scorsese is a legend who's worked with so many great actors and so many times. But every step of the way in the original version of this movie, DiCaprio kept demanding Scorsese's answer, what's the story? What's the heart of this movie? I don't feel like me being Tom White, that's the heart of a movie. What is it? What is it? And he kept prodding Scorsese and Roth, and eventually they settled on the fact of, and I think it was DiCaprio's idea that he play Ernest, which was
Ernest Burkhart, the main character.
Yeah, which in the original versions of the movie was more of a side character, not the lead. And he's like, I think we should do this. And that actually DiCaprio's prodding got us onto that. In much the same way DiCaprio...
I feel like it would have been too much like Shutter Island to have been, except without the supernatural aspects or the thriller aspects of it, to have made him be the Tom White character. Yeah, it would have been a lot like that.
And DiCaprio apparently did the same thing with Tarantino on as Rick Dalton in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, that he kept pushing you're telling me all about these movies he's made, but who is he? He kept prodding Tarantino, and that eventually led to, I think, all the successes.
Yeah,
that
God forbid Tarantino write a good character.
But I mean, again, DiCaprio should deserve a lot of credit. He's very selective about what roles he has. He knows he knows he's one of the last few real, actual, genuine movie stars, and so every movie that he's in is like, okay, what is it? What's the character? What's the heart of this? And so I think he deserves some credit for that.
The fact those questions are asked, I think, says a lot about the product, though, and kind of what some of the failings are. But yeah.
So I think the movie is very high quality. I'm glad it got made. I do wonder a little bit, and I know this is something Levi's going to talk a lot about probably, that it feels both, and this is not a phrase we say lightly, too long, but also maybe too short. That it seems as though there's some missing pieces in this that I feel like, is strange to have in a movie that style that I very much love takes its time and paces itself out. But again, not to the strengths that I feel like The Irishman was able to achieve in terms of all of that. But again, I'm very grateful that this movie exists, period. I I do have some questions, and I'll let you take the lead on this, and then I'll piggyback on it. About this movie's depiction of Native Americans seems a little more... I think people are giving it a little too much credit for that. I'll say that, I guess.
You mean positively?
Positively credit.
Yeah.
That simply depicting this world means it's great. You know.
Yeah, I don't think it does either. I don't think it's particularly grand or particularly disrespectful either. I think
I don't think that,
average,
but I just I think
but there are people
not,
that are saying that too. So not as many.
So I'll hand the floor over to you now, Levi. And,
I want to start with the length.
Okay.
I want to go ahead and start, first of all, Grandpa's not feeling frisky today. There's no reason for me to come out here and be... So, I, like everyone else, and I say this literally, I, like everyone else, am a Scorsese fan. Love Martin Scorsese. He's a genius. Probably the greatest American auteur of the past 50 years. So, it gives me no joy to... be the bearer of bad news, I suppose, of how I feel about this movie, which I gave 4 stars and do like.
Mm-hmm.
So let me make that clear. I want to start with the length, though. I'm going to compare this movie a lot to Heaven's Gate, because I think it's a lot like it in a lot of various ways.
Certainly an epic revisionist Western.
Which, by the way, and in case y'all didn't know by now, we were talking about it last week, Heaven's Gate is quickly becoming one of my favorite movies. Watching this made me want to watch all of Heaven's Gate again. I think that movie, obviously there's a reason why it was reviled at the time. Let's go ahead and catch up, though. Let's get over it.
Let's just say also about Heaven's Gate, I think Heaven's Gate, among many great things about it, has one of the greatest narrative arcs in all the movies in terms of the arc and the scope of it and what it's saying, about the way
has definitive statements, definitive themes and ideas that are communicated in 3 hours and a half. So that's where I want to start, is that movie, for all it's whatever anybody wants to say about it, I don't think it can be denied, and some people would say this is a negative about it, it cannot be denied that it has a definitive voice, a definitive thought process, a definitive theme, and a definitive statement on race relations in the American West and what that is. Now, of course, it does it from an Eastern European point of view, which most people are going to see as irrelevant, even though the fact that actually happened. But also, the point of that, I think, is if you get white people shooting white people, you're also, sadly, this is the truth, you're going to think more about, man, this is all kind of ridiculous, isn't it? And then it makes you think, oh, well, what about everything else?
Because that movie has practically zero depiction
absolutely
of Native
no Native
people.
American presence at all.
Yeah. So as you said,
or African American or whatever.
This kind of European on European violence is depicted in the movie. Almost like you said, it brings the absurdity of it more to the forefront, because if we see Native American versus European American peoples, then
or even African Americans
then it
versus
kind of
whites, or
boils
whatever,
it down in a way that it's this people versus this people.
And so that is a success in the sense of asking us to question racism in general. And a lot of people would argue the extent to the success of that in the movie. I think it's a success. I can understand other people not. The point is, though, that movie in 3.5 hours is able to communicate its ideas so definitively and precisely. We've talked a lot about, but the idea of beginning the film with the Harvard class of, what was it, 1860?
Was it 70?
Or no, I'm sorry, 1870, because it was 20 years. 1870, and then showing what happens to all of these people. Yeah, because it was 20 years ago. It was 1890 is the main section of the movie. And we've talked about it a lot, but using Blue Danube Waltz at the beginning, and you kind of roll your eyes when you first watch it, like you've said, because you're like, oh yeah, 2001, okay, whatever. But then when you have those at the end, when it's showing all the dead bodies of the immigrants all have been slaughtered by the government in this massive battle, and it plays very softly, that music. That also, along with John Hurt's character, who I think is maybe in the top, 2 most important characters in the movie, randomly, for a movie that has a bunch of different characters.
He doesn't get as much screen time necessarily as other characters.
Because he comes in and out of the movie quite a bit. but that he beginning the movie with this stupid, totally and lame-brained speech literally means nothing. And to end it
which
with
I feel
him,
like is in its own way him reveling in how brilliant he is and how I'm going to go on and do all these great things, and this is all so silly and preposterous.
You're going to
meanwhile the Reverend Doctor sits and shakes his head.
Right, and he was right all along, the Reverend Doctor. I mean, he literally got his name, Joseph Cotton, as the Reverend Doctor on the friggin' poster. So, But no, I mean, I know you're going to roll your eyes as I'm saying this. I'm not you, but just because you understand this. But people, if you haven't seen the movie, or if you have and you don't like it, or you even think I'm just being pretentious, to further prolong this introduction to my thoughts on Killers of the Flower Moon, but that him just spouting hot air over nothing, and his life ends in a field in Wyoming in the middle of this massive gun battle between white people who one group sees as less than the other, and him literally realizing that as he's about to die, even before he actually gets shot, and he realizes this is the end of my life, essentially, is just one of the most profound, you said narrative arcs, that's even one narrative arc in that movie. One. And it's not even a major one. And so, like I said, that movie is not known for being subtle.
Mm-hmm.
But
well, also there are a lot of journeys within the movie too. You think about Christopher Walken's character. You think about even like Jeff Bridges is kind of way down on the list in terms of actors you think about in that movie. But I mean, that's such a precise performance and character. Chris Christopherson's is the one I most think about because that's, of course, he's the main character, and how he effectively abandons his privilege throughout most of the movie by being a sheriff in this random town and area before reclaiming it at the movie's end is a statement I think a lot about in terms of I think one of the most profound statements of Cimino's
because
career.
that's what's so fascinating about that movie. He begins and ends with the same woman being rich, and then it makes you think, well, what was any of that in the middle? What was his whole life? Because that's what his life is. Not everything on the either side of it. What he witnessed and held part to.
What he chose to be a part of.
And then what he did, and like I said, he didn't choose to be a part of the elite. He chose to be the opposite of that. But then the sad reality is that the elite accepted him back and said, oh yeah, whatever, you need to come back over here now. And just, like I said, what that even means. So all this is just to say, I think that movie's genius, brilliant. And then
we talked last time about how that has been its whole identity is categorized as a flop and something that ruined United Artists. As if that has anything to do with the actual art in the movie. Which
and
is
it's not
absurd.
the best movie of the New Hollywood movement, but I feel like it's
and Reds do represent kind of the last gasp.
Well,
of
those are both the height though of like, all right, so we've got all the money, what can we do with it? And then you still make it about things. You know what I mean? Because all that's to say that it can be done. Long movies can be done this way. The problem with Killers of the Flower Moon, ultimately, to me, is that it loses its way very quickly. In the sense of, what is it exactly, and I'm posing this question to you, the audience, to myself, to anyone, what is it this movie is asking of me, exactly? What is it wanting me to understand? What is it wanting me to think about what it's saying? The issue comes in very quickly in the sense that I felt, well, first of all, and I'll start here also, every scene between DiCaprio and De Niro is a disappointment to me. I don't know if that's the writing, the acting, or what, because they're both acting great. Now, De Niro's performance is pretty thankless, just kind of basic villain role. DiCaprio certainly wins the movie. He and Gladstone, I think, are both great. And their scenes together are great.
That's the best stuff in the movie. And to me, I think ultimately that's what the movie's about.
Yes, and so that's what I want the movie to be about. But then it becomes all about, like, because did you not feel, as for a movie that is a Scorsese movie, there's a lot of talking going on?
Well,
like, and his movies do have a lot of dialogue. I'm not saying that. But there's a little less, not that I'm complaining. All these things sound like I'm complaining about great things, but most of his movies have more violence or more this person doing this thing. It's very wordy. There's a lot of dialogue going on. But at the same time, we get so lost in the dialogue, it feels almost like a court deposition at a point. about this person told this person this on this date at this time.
As I said, in the third act, that's part of my problem with the movie.
And
it
so
falls too much in that
I
category.
think ultimately the reading on it, it's a 3.5 hour long monograph in its own way.
Well, I think
part of that comes from the adaptation,
and especially following The Irishman and the silences of that movie
Yes.
are among the most paralyzing things about it. And there is dialogue, obviously, and there's a good chunk of stuff. But, I would say this is more dialogue-driven than
and that's not a problem. But the problem is there's a lot of talking, but I'm not hearing a whole lot of what I want to hear, which is... How do you feel about this, or what's your thought process on what's happening to you as you, and I'm speaking as DiCaprio, what's happening to you as you become a part of your family's scheme? Because at a point, it seemed like there's some scenes missing where he just said, oh yeah, I'll kill my sister-in-law and husband. Yeah, whatever. And there's like no thought. Now I know, and we talked about this off air, how, and it's kind of the way the movie even gets by on a lot of its ideas is just how, and I'm not just saying this like as in the proverbial idiot. Literally, Leonardo DiCaprio is a mentally deficient idiot.
I saw somebody tweet this
Yeah.
a day or two ago that is this the lowest IQ Scorsese
Yes.
protagonist in history? And
Which
it seems
I
like it is.
Which I appreciate in the sense of that's why the ending works too. When she asks, so did you know that you were poisoning me? And it's like he doesn't know what to say. And I honestly believe he literally was so stupid that he didn't even know. And then he's thinking, and then it's almost a realization of, why didn't I know that? And then he doesn't have an answer, and that's why they get divorced. So that all makes sense to me. I feel like there's all these scenes in the middle somewhere where it's being too subtle, almost.
Yeah.
It's being too subtle, but then there's a lot of talking. So it's like kind of grading against each other, that idea.
Yeah.
But, so that's my major issue with the whole movie is it's so long, but yet I don't want to say it's wasting my time, because I don't want to say that any long Scorsese movie wasted my time. But I do feel like it's rather wasting the time of the narrative to engage in things that I'm not interested in, which is 40 minutes of, how are we going to kill Jason Isbell? I don't know. Like, it's so daggum hard to get somebody to kill somebody. You know?
I will say that this movie has some very, very dark comedy. Which
it's
obviously
funny. Yeah,
a lot of Scorsese movies have.
Yeah.
The whole thing about you got to shoot him in the head and make it look like an accident.
Yeah.
And the way
he shoots him in the back of the head.
Yeah.
Doesn't leave the gun, and the brains are all over the windshield.
Yeah.
And it's like literally so stupid. He's like, I'm done with it. I don't care. It's like he has an attitude. It's like literally you did nothing right.
That in its own way is an amusing aspect of the movie, but also can get into being a little bit of a problem.
Yeah.
I think is there are a lot of things about this movie that remind me of like specifically Casino. Now, obviously, the style is very different, but in terms of like we got to keep this thing going, so you got to do this, and it's kind of a comedy of errors after a point of people not exactly doing their job, but also the system either incentivizes this behavior, which again I think this movie is one of the strengths of the movie. I think is that I think it is a pretty spot on depiction of what white supremacy looks like at a systemic level.
Because they're all smiling and acting like, oh, we care about you. It's different than.
And then you literally have like a Klan parade literally going through the town.
And the guy that was in No Country for Old Men is that old guy is literally a Klan member and is like a big person in the community. That's something that's not really discussed very much. He works at the bank, I think.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And basically has control over the allocation.
And then also, there's a lot of people that have praised this about the movie, and I think this is actually very true. How medicine and doctors are often very complicit in either the eradication of people of color, native peoples, or that they play a role in that.
Whether that be eugenics or whatever. Yeah, that was something.
Or also under treatment of
or under treatment
communities
or
like
mistreatment
that.
Inherently. Yeah.
And how much moving and shaking has to be done in the 1920s for Washington D.C. to care about any of this.
Yeah, because I've talked bad about Calvin Coolidge for years. Noted Calvin Coolidge hater.
Yeah.
one of the definitive things, I said this when we were watching it, and one of the definitive things that's positive about Calvin Coolidge is that he actually did a lot for Native American rights for a president of that time. Which is to say he barely cared, which is saying a lot more than someone like Theodore Roosevelt, for example, or whoever,
who overall was a better president.
Very
appalling views of like people.
But that wasn't unique to him,
right?
But yeah, that is.
But there was, I know, in the 20s and 30s, a little. Again, I say this, it's like it's still horrible, but it's better than how horrible it used to be. But in the 20s and 30s, there were starting to be a little bit more evolving attitudes about Native American people.
Well, and we have to say that is also parallel to the reemergence of the Ku Klux Klan, so it all goes to show how screwed up the country's always been in that regard.
Right, absolutely. Yeah. Relative progress, obviously. And where to next with this? And again, like, I think as an audience, we obviously inherently are happy with the arrival of Tom White, and they're happy with how is this all gonna finally come crumbling down, or and I do like how
I love the simplicity of that moment. It's in the trailer where he's like, or DiCaprio's at the door and he's like, "What do you want?" And he's like, "To see who's doing it."
Yeah,
like he has to say, like he doesn't understand even at a basic level, other than hiding what's going on. Like, what, you want to know why?
Yeah.
It's like, yeah. And so
he's like, all right, well, she can't talk right now. And he's like, can we talk tomorrow? And he's like, no, that's not gonna be good.
He's like, how about Friday? He's like, yeah, Friday, okay. It's like, how about I come in there right now?
One of my favorite scenes too was some of the interrogation scenes later in the movie. It's just
I need to talk to that man.
Well, they would allow that to happen. I guess they're like, we're gonna be standing right outside the door.
Oh yeah,
so
like they're not gonna be standing there listening. Yeah. He's literally so dumb. He thinks they're not gonna listen.
Well, then the whole comedy of errors about. Wait, so you let him have his Buick? You let him have your Buick?
Your Roadster.
Roadster. And it's like, and he's,
and it's like, why'd you do that? And it's just so dumb.
That's another thing too. I want to ask is was something that's this subject matter that is so serious in terms of we're talking about the eradication of Native American peoples and like very big stuff. I hate to ask this, but it's something I've been kind of thinking about. Yeah. Is there a place for comedy in that kind of story?
I think there is, in the sense of the one of the things I will defend the movie on. I think there is, in the sense that it's showing literally how stupid and inept all these white people are.
Right.
And what fools they are. Even then, I agree. I wonder how appropriate it is for a movie like this to do that, and why is it spending 3.5 hours to do that?
There's a lot of comedy in Goodfellas. Yeah. There's comedy in Casino. There's comedy in The Departed. There's comedy in Irishman.
But a lot of comedy in Silence.
You get the feeling that most of not really. That's probably the rightfully most humorless movie ever made.
Or the Last Temptation of Christ. Also,
but like. Yeah. You mostly feel like everything that happens to the people in those movies, except obviously there's stray people caught in the middle, but on the whole, everybody deserves what they get. And so you're like, oh, haha, well, whatever, who cares?
Because it's dealing with people that are inherently evil.
But I will say, again...
Like the big tragedy, for example, in The Departed is the death of Martin Sheen. Like, that's one of the few murders in his movies. It's like, oh man, that really shouldn't have happened. Literally everybody else is like, I don't care or whatever, but yeah.
And he shouldn't have been killed, but even that, he's a law enforcement officer. He's in the game of the cat and mouse anyways. But like, there are literal Native American people and even children it discusses that are like murdered and killed. And so I wonder sometimes if this movie pushes it a little far. And I say that as somebody who genuinely likes Scorsese's brand of comedy, but I just want subject matter so serious about like this, and especially coming out in the year 2023, how frankly there's a lot of things we sometimes criticize but are rightfully sensitive about these issues. I do wonder if sometimes I'm like, there shouldn't be a comedy.
Well, and I think that's
or is that just him shrugging and saying, listen, this stuff is so absurd and so screwed up, but there's also a humor to it, then whatever.
I think it's partly that, and I think he's used to making this type of movie another way, and maybe he just didn't make the movie that was needed to be made in this sense of this kind of form or disposition with this material, like you're saying. I don't think it's an insult to it so much as it's just, oh yeah, that wasn't real. Like, I don't look at that and go, oh, Marty, you were bad or whatever. I just think, oh, you can maybe done that differently.
Let's talk a little bit to that end about this movie's depiction of Native American peoples. obviously Lily
Gladstone.
Lily Gladstone. I think for a lot of people is going to be the biggest surprise in terms of people that are maybe not as familiar with her. Again, we really adore her in certain women, and she even almost.
I've watched her in anything.
She was
then,
even in Billions a little bit.
Yes,
Actually, is like this background
weird,
kind of character.
Right.
But apparently she was like on the verge of quitting acting because she was literally not getting any roles, and was gonna like sign up for some online course for something.
Yeah.
And literally got an email from Martin Scorsese. Said, hey, I want you to audition to be in my movie. And just how literally from heaven that had to have dropped out of to be for her. She's incredible. You mentioned, and I was even thinking the same thing too, one of my favorite scenes of the movie is the scene between her and DiCaprio that the famous steal comes from, which is of them sitting kind of, and, you know, there's a storm outside. It's just really them two in that kind of in the house. And he's wanting to close the windows because obviously it's raining. It's, there's all this storm outside. And she's like, no, be still. Just take in the storm and listen. And obviously that right there shows you this illustration between who she is and who he is. And really just, I think one of the most heartbreaking aspects of the movie is her very early on. She's confronted about her husband to say, oh, he's only trying to marry you for the money. And she almost acknowledges that, but also says, yeah, but I still love him. I still am, find him to be attractive, and I think he's the guy for me, which makes the betrayal even more heartbreaking in the end.
Yeah.
What did you think about Gladstone, but also general, how that extends into the depiction of Native American peoples in this?
I think it's really pretty good overall. She's great in anything. I think some of the material could have served her better. I'll give you an example, though. One thing I think that's successful that seems maybe that it's not is that early on she's very confident about white and Native American relations, and she's like seen as, to him and to her both, she's the one who's way smarter, way more mature, like, a lot more of a fully formed person. She becomes less of that as the movie goes along, and I think it's by naturally being in love with him. That
the love blinds her from that.
Yes, and I think that mostly works, but there is a question of what happened to that person at the beginning also. Or to her to say, maybe what I thought about white people was wrong, and being blind to that of, he's just this simpleton. Of course he couldn't hate me or hate my family or whatever. And I don't think it's as simple as that either. I don't think he does. But it's a lot more about, this is what my family wants, and I guess I do need this thing and that thing, and it's all about property, and it's not about the person to him.
Right.
That doesn't mean it's not obviously a form of racism or genocide that he's taking part in. But the movie stakes itself on that also, of making us kind of want to feel bad for him, which I mostly don't, but
let me say real quickly about that.
Yeah.
There was a moment, one of the moments I keep thinking about in the movie is one of the earliest scenes between him and De Niro is where he's like, he's asking him about his service in what was World War I, called the Great War. And he's like, did you see a lot of guys die over there, like get killed, basically? And he's like, well, more people died from flu. And then immediately De Niro changes the subject and is like, well, anyways, whatever, I don't care.
Yeah.
And there is an aspect,
he didn't really see a whole lot.
There is an aspect of the lost generation, in that moment, in terms of nobody actually really cares. Did you serve your country? Did you fight? Did you kill the Huns? Okay, well, good, we'll move on. And his inability to actually articulate probably some of the things he saw. And there's a thing later on where he talks about a French guy's leg or whatever.
Yeah.
But that was kind of a dark moment of comedy that I've kept thinking about in terms of, we actually don't really care about whatever you went through. We're just going to move on, and you didn't quite give me the answer I was looking for in this exchange, and I thought that was a fascinating little moment.
Yeah, and so as far as its depiction of Native Americans, I think it's mostly fine. The misgivings just go along with the movie's misgivings in general, I think, also, and so I don't feel like I said, if anything, it just needed more of that. I don't feel like what was there was bad.
But don't you feel like in the beginning there's a little more of a, it's not maybe even half and half, but there's more of that, and then as it goes on, it's just totally taken over. And maybe that's an inherent statement in terms of whiteness subsuming and assimilating like this culture, but again, I feel like part of the novelty for some was seeing, how Scorsese's going to handle Native American culture.
Yeah.
And that kind of gets
and it kind of begins.
I'll
say this too, and people can take this the way they want to. I guess it is what it is. It begins with them putting to rest this ancient pipe.
Yeah.
That was seen, I guess, as their kind of beacon of knowledge for the tribe, and saying we have to put this away because of white people. And there's this really great shot of like them burying it, and it's the 3 Native American men burying the pipe, and they're kind of over here in the frame. And there's a lot. I mean, it literally feels like a John Ford still. Like is what that's the first thought I had. I was like, John Ford, like you know. And so I'm not saying that Martin Scorsese's depiction of Native Americans is to John Ford like that is, because his was, you know, notoriously racist in very many ways, or at least not dedicated or interested. So I wouldn't say that. I feel like they are depicted as that. But like I said, I think I said this. Whole movie's a lot more about assimilation, especially early on. Yeah. And then it just kind of become then assimilation naturally happens, I suppose, at some point. But maybe this is a point, not to dodge the question, but maybe this is a point also to go talk about this movie as a Western, which I don't really think it is precisely, just as I don't think that Heaven's Gate is totally a Western either. I mean, it is, but both the movies just so happen to be about race relations in the West.
I think Heaven's Gate's more.
It is more of a Western. It is, but that's almost. I think the difference with what makes Heaven's Gate more of a Western is think about that same movie, kind of like Gangs of New York, for example, which Scorsese directed, of these about this race war that's going on between people in New York City, for example. The difference in Heaven's Gate is that there's no one there to stop them because it's out in the middle of nowhere. So the government can literally do whatever it wants because nobody's going to complain, you know. So that's the tragedy of that movie, is that there's no one to stop them from doing this. It's literally open spaces that they're going to have to defend themselves, and there's nowhere to hide. Literally, that whole idea. This is like that too, but the difference is that the government is more dedicated to actually dealing with it by that point. And so it's more in its own way. The most Western aspect of it is that about saying, we can do all this, and then the government shows up and they're like, wait, what are you doing? And they're like, it's all right. No, actually it's not. You're going to stop doing this thing. And it shows the change of the time of their thoughts on literal genocide of a people. Like I said, there's a major difference there between race with this movie and Heaven's Gate because of who is involved. But I think that is an interesting update on that, to say, no, you're not going to be able to do that. Like, you know. And so in that sense, like you said, I think early on it's a lot more about the Native American culture, and then it becomes not that. But also, I think that's literally almost a statement of, there's no one left to really say anything, because most of the major Native American characters have been killed by that point. And so it's almost a meta statement on their stories are lost.
I did find one of the most beautiful moments in the movie, the most sublime moments, are when Lily Gladstone's mother, everything else disappears and she sees this owl and kind of come into the frame, and she says later to her that once you see that owl, that means you know that you're starting to die. And I think one of the most beautiful moments in the movie is when the mother dies and literally everything else disappears, and you see what looks like these elders or these almost supernatural figures kind of take her into.
It doesn't say who they are, but you assume that. I assumed it was her parents and the one who's more in the traditional Native American wear is some spirit taking her. That's what I assumed. But that is. But so.
And then later on, we see her see the owl. Which makes her think, I'm in the process of dying, or, you know.
But so I think that's kind of the rub on the movie in that sense, is that it's kind of almost a meta nature of it that sort of saves it for me, is that it's like, it's literally there aren't any Native American voices left other than her. And she kind of has to realize, I've kind of become white, in quotes. And so that is one thing that I think is mostly fine with the movie. The biggest problem is it just doesn't have enough depiction of that in, once again, a 3.5 hour movie. That's just, like I said, that's
especially
the whole,
in a third act, it
yes.
feels like Scorsese also ran the plot. You know what I mean? I mean, that needed to change or be something else. We can go back to other things, but just to talk, you said meta a second ago, which makes me think about the very conclusion of the movie, how just to spoil it ever so briefly if you've not seen it. The movie jumps very suddenly to what seems as though it's the mid to late 40s radio show that is depicting this whole drama as a radio
podcast, basically.
Basically, again, a lot of people have been talking about this, is almost a true crime podcast, and Scorsese himself even has the final bit of narration. Well, it's not exactly narration, but him talking into the mic, which almost kind of narrates the movie of the conclusion of it. Do you feel like that's in any way pointing a finger towards our own, and when I say our, I mean the culture in general's obsession with taking these true crime things and adapting them into entertainments or narratives, and that maybe Scorsese himself is even reflecting on how he's made a career out of such adaptations of reality.
Yeah, and I mean, he kind of does that, but I don't remember what his last line of dialogue is.
I think it's all about Lily Gladstone's characters. Right. Reading from her obituary, I think, basically. Or saying
no, that's what it was. That's what it was, and he said there was no mention of the murders, he said. And that's almost, I think there's something to that about him kind of looking to us and saying, oh, y'all thought this is all fun and games, and what is it really that we're watching or doing? The problem is, I think he took it as too many fun and games with his kind of style.
We do get Jack White as one of the
weird.
radio. A lot of musicians in this movie, by the way, too.
Yeah, Sturgill Simpson, Jason Isbell, right.
And I mean, De Niro sang a song or two before he died in Cape Fear. We can't forget. So he's a musician in his own right.
Right. Oh, who will come with me? I'm bound for the promised land.
So if you go to Wikipedia, by the way, Martin Scorsese himself is a Wikipedia link which talks about director cameos, I think, apparently.
Right.
But
yeah, so that's all just to say that I think you're right about that. That's the intent. Is the kind of, and even before that, it's all this, the stupid radio show. Well, I'm talking on the phone, and here's a sound effect, and then it's just very dead silent when he gets up there to read it, and it's kind of like, I want you to really think about all this, and it's like, I was trying to do that. I don't know what you were doing the whole time, and I don't mean that to be too negative. I'm just saying, I was taking it seriously, but okay, which goes to the thing you said about why is it so funny at a point. I don't know.
Yeah.
I wonder, even for people who have a really morbid sense of humor and laugh at things that are kind of weird and not supposed to be funny, it's intending to be kind of funny. I mean,
right.
Yeah.
This might seem a random question to ask. We don't have to spend too much long on this, but there is an element I was thinking about this is his kind of second-ish foray into 1920s culture. Of course, Boardwalk Empire was a huge project, and then The Aviator, that kind of starts in the early 30s. But, I mean, loosely speaking, it's kind of that world a little bit.
People use the opening of it, though, as a big exemplification of what the Jazz Age was.
And I think we all agree that, Boardwalk Empire, other than being a crime drama and being part of that, and again, he directed the first episode, and then he was an executive producer and did have some creative input across the whole show.
Mm-hmm.
That's more of a natural fit for him than this story, I feel like is. Wouldn't you agree? I mean, obviously, beyond being a gangland tale,
urban environment.
That's the biggest thing I was getting ready to say is, and you wrote about this idea of him adapting more rural environments in other films.
Yeah.
But this, Boardwalk Empire being an urban story, and I almost wonder too if there was any aspects or things obviously the research that would have to go into Boardwalk Empire would have been so expansive that I wonder to what extent he was drawing on any of that as he adapted this, which is a very different place, but nonetheless has elements of 20s culture. I also couldn't help but think he had to probably for himself geek out on ending it on that note in terms of this is what I remember. This is the world I remember in terms of these radio dramas and these radio plays of the late 40s going into the 50s just before TV.
I do love the final image of the movie, which is
so it does recenter it back on the Osage people.
And it looking kind of like a flower. That's kind of the point, I think. But,
Brendan Fraser in the movie. Thoughts? There's been a lot of people actually been criticizing him on Twitter, and then people jumping back the Fraser mob, then defending him.
Literally,
or whatever.
The fact you're even asking me the question.
I mean, he's pretty much an afterthought.
Yeah,
He's very late in the movie.
Didn't even care.
I mean, he was effectively
that's like asking how
Hale.
good John Lithgow is in his role. Like, I don't care. Like,
that's randomly been a talking point on Twitter a little bit the last few days.
Of course, it has.
I mean, he's very deep into the movie. He's basically Hale De Niro's.
I forgot he was even going to be in it. Like,
defense attorney.
Well, then there's that whole thing about you signed that paper, and I'm technically his lawyer, and then they kind of deal with that off screen. I don't know.
Yeah.
But, that's the thing is there's so many details here that he gets bogged down in the details, and it's like I don't really care about that though. I care about what this means, and I don't know. Another sequence that I feel like is supposed to mean something, and it does come. And this movie reminded me a lot of Days of Heaven too, in a lot of ways.
Terrence Malick movie, yeah.
There's the whole part where they're burning his ranch for some reason, and there's all these shots of the people doing stuff, and it's like.
And then you got De Niro's face and the flames across
it. And he is, and they are inside, and she is dying. Yeah, and it's just like
that's heavy.
What is any of this?
Intentionally
it's like,
over the
why,
head,
why though?
Yeah.
Why? What am I looking at? Like, I don't understand. I don't know. It sounds like I'm just complaining for no reason. I know, but it's just like it's a whole lot of something for a whole lot of nothing. Kind of at a point, it's like okay, like I don't know.
Well, again, where does this stack for what? There's a lot of ways I could ask this, I guess. Like, where does this fit in his filmography for you?
Well, if you're talking about ranking-wise, I have ranked them, and so I added to this yesterday. I suppose out of the 26 movies of his I've seen, it's 18th.
So it's lower.
Yes. So it is below... it's above After Hours, but below The Last Waltz, if that makes any sense.
Sure.
So... and King of Comedy.
Again, I did like it better than you, but
let me actually switch this around a little bit. Hang on. Yeah, go ahead.
I will be honest. I think part of it for me is just reveling in the experience of what this is and what this represents for him, and that this is obviously a late career movie. He's only going to make probably a handful more or less than that. Yeah. And again, the kind of the tragedy of thinking about he's only got so many more swings at the bat, so to speak. But again, the career he's left behind is going to be one of the most beloved in all the cinema's history. So, I think it's one of those things too. This is probably going to be a movie that introduces Scorsese to sometimes younger audiences in terms of the discussion that this movie's going to engender and be a part of. And seemingly, as you kind of said earlier, outsized place that I think it has on this film year, because we've actually had a lot of great movies, I think, already this year.
Yeah.
From Beau is Afraid to Asteroid City.
Oppenheimer.
And so, when I look at those movies, and I look at this is just not quite on the level of those, I don't feel like. So, any other last thoughts before we move on from it?
No.
All right. So, again, that's Killers of the Flower Moon. It's in theaters now, of course, but again, I'm not sure how long it's going to be there, so if you get a chance...
for how long? Literally.
Check it out.
Yeah.
Alright, so going back to 1999, and we're going to be going back to 1999 with, of course, The Sixth Sense a little bit later, The Blair Witch Project, which I've seen this movie a few times. This was Levi's first time.
Yeah, and I feel like we've actually talked a lot about it here recently without me having seen it, but I finally have done it now.
This movie, this poster, I remember seeing... back in the 90s.
It's unsailing images or everything.
Yeah, and it is like, what am I watching? Should I be watching this? Like, and that's the feeling of the movie itself. Of course, it's a found footage horror movie. It's fictional, of course. But it was sold and marketed back in 1999 as, oh no, this is a real thing. Which is a very 90s thing to do and is part of the larger bleeding of fact and fiction that has been with us ever since this time period. Yeah. Of course, it's about these, these three student filmmakers.
These three stooges.
Yeah. Who hike into the Black Hills near Burkittsville, Maryland, and what says is 1994. So it was in the movie, it's a few years before when it was released, to film a documentary about the local myth known as the Blair Witch. They disappear, but their equipment and footage are found a year later. and of course the found footage is what we witness and see. I'm going to ask you a similar question, Levi, later with The Sixth Sense, but it's in a little bit of a different context. You knew what this movie was all about, what it represented, what it meant, even before seeing it. But to actually watch it for the first time, what were your biggest takeaways or thoughts?
I can't get it out of my mind. This incredible movie. I mean,
there's one that you were not to say anything that you were kind of scared to see for a long time. And what was that expectation, and how did the movie fit that expectation?
It mostly fit that. I mean, it wasn't quite as scary as I had thought, but it's one of those things. I had seen parts of the movie years ago. I knew vaguely. I had read the Wikipedia summary. I knew things that had happened.
Well, even the premise is almost telling itself.
Yeah.
You know it's going to be a version of it.
I knew that the Blair Witch was not in the movie. I knew that overall nothing really happens in the movie until the very end. Which, honestly, can I talk about the end real quick and I'll go back? You know what's funny about that is, like, it is scary. I won't say it ain't, but I almost laugh at it now because it's been so meme-ified of, like, people standing in corners and stuff. Like, it just, I don't know, that just becomes kind of funny. But to that end, I knew how it all ended, and we know how it ends. We're told how it ends at the beginning. They're disappeared.
The
they don't exist anymore.
Obviously, yeah.
But no, just as and I mean, obviously, there's things you see through. I think to talk about the negatives first, because I think this is like a 4.5 star movie. I think it's great. Just quickly talk about the negatives. I think that one thing is the whole Mike guy kicking the map in the water.
It makes no sense.
What? Even beyond them going crazy. That just doesn't make sense inherently.
Yeah. Like, I guess they just needed some excuse for the map went missing.
If he ripped it up, it would make sense. He kicked the map in the creek? Like, what? Just literally makes no sense. Like, so that's one thing. There are things in the movie that do take you out of the movie slightly. Now, of course, you know it's not real. But most of it, though, does feel so... And that's why I knew I would have trouble watching it, is because I have trouble with found footage because it breaks down the barrier of this isn't real to make you feel like it's supposed to be. And most found footage movies suck and are really bad versions of that.
Now, you're a big fan of the McPherson tape.
Yeah.
Well, it came out in 80...
Mid-80s.
Or
mid to late 80s,
I know you're a big fan of that, and you showed me that, and I like that, too.
Yeah, that is really
good. But
this
is, I feel like, the one that put it on the map as a concept and as a genre.
Now,
I guess there is, like...
There are other versions of that. There was The Legend of Boggy Creek in the early 80s. There was the McPherson tape. There was also Cannibal Holocaust. So there's a lot of versions of that type of thing that have happened.
This is the first one that was actually like a genuine pop cultural phenomenon.
And this is the most immersive of those. And I love the McPherson tape, but one of the things about that takes you out of the movie slightly is the look of the aliens, which I like, but also says, this ain't real.
Yeah,
like, you know,
I agree with that.
This, it doesn't show you anything. So it's like, well, it doesn't matter what it looks like because we don't know.
The biggest thing we get are like these rocks that have been piled around their tents,
and the cairns and the symbols and the house itself, the sounds. I guess them bringing back the teeth in the shirt or whatever. So there are things that happen. I guess the most direct thing that happens in the movie is when they're in the tent and something comes up and is rustling it, which, funny enough, is literally just somebody going ooh like that.
Yeah, right.
But taking all that aside, though, what works so much about the movie is just the people, their personalities being so clearly formed.
Yep.
How things begin. So that's what's so weird about it too. It's like the movie starts so nonchalantly. It made me feel like, oh, okay, you know, because you go into the movie already freaked out because of what it's going to be.
Even the friggin' let me just say, the menu even for this had this intense. I saw it a little bit before you came down because it restarted or whatever, but
the music,
has this intensity about it. And I know this movie also had a soundtrack that was kind of big, which. Obviously, the movie itself does not feature music in it.
Wait, hang on a second. So there was like a soundtrack of songs?
Yeah.
Or it was like music made for the movie?
No, it was like songs that I think were licensed to be on the soundtrack that purported to give off a vibe that obviously
I'm gonna have to go
movie
listen
does
to
not,
that.
of course, have.
No,
I know our friends at the OST did a podcast about this.
Oh, they
talked
did.
about
That's
it,
right.
like,
I forgot.
a long time ago.
Yeah, but I'd forgotten that. Well, that's just crazy because I'm like,
because obviously the movie does not feature any original.
Because I'm imagining
music
like a Tool song or something like, and you just laugh and you're like, there's no music that can capture this feeling.
I can't remember exactly what all they said about that, but there is some soundtrack that exists.
Anyway, because there's music at the beginning and the end of the movie that's very oppressive, and I understand that. But because I did look, the movie had a composer, and I was like, how? But then, of course, there's that at the beginning and the end. But the movie starts very nonchalant. It almost lulled me into thinking, oh, okay, like everything will be all right.
Yeah,
it wasn't. But no, because I don't want to like laugh too much about the movie because it's so dead serious about what it is, and I'm going to talk about the thing I love the most about the movie were the themes, and I don't want to get too pretentious about that either. But what the movie's really about, I think I'm fascinated by. But I don't know, the movie's kind of funny in certain senses when you watch it. When it's like I was telling you, we were sitting eating dinner yesterday, and they were talking about it and with our parents a little bit, and I was like, yeah, just kind of need to get over themselves, just, you keep walking, you'll get out of here, whatever, Then it didn't work out, but
I think you would agree that part of the haunting nature of the whole movie is it starts off as this carefree thing, and you get the feeling that I can't remember the names of the characters. Let me look real quick.
Well, Heather, Josh, and Mike
Heather and Josh know each other.
Yes.
Mike knows Josh, but Mike is kind of the outsider a little bit. Heather doesn't know him as well. But you get, they're like in their early 20s or whatever they are, in the 90s. They're Gen X kids. I mean, they don't have a lot of conversations about that stuff, but you just know that's who they are. And, they get to know each other, and then, and they even like interview people in the town, and so it kind of establishes this fictional myth of what the Blair Witch is and how certain people in the town believe it, other people don't. And then the bulk of it is, well, we're going to go out and we're going to find the cemetery. I think they say that's
where there were 7 kids were murdered by that Rustin Parr guy in the 40s, and they buried them there.
And so they go into the woods, and then they get lost. But then it's like, oh, it's okay, we'll find our way out. But then part of the horror of the movie is seeing them break down and start to realize, wait a minute, are we being turned around, like literally, and in this space, like. And again, it's like, this is what I love about like low budget horror, is that this is a great example of how found footage can work, is that it's using what is available. It's not using any big special effects. It's literally, they're shooting this thing out in the middle of the woods.
The biggest special effect in the movie are Josh's bloody teeth. Like, that's it.
And so it's really making the most out of nothing. And the slow madness that creeps in.
That's what I appreciated so much about it, is it's a very slow breakdown of the psyche. It's not very quick. It all feels like, and while you're watching it that what's going to happen, but it's just very like, well, okay, we'll go that direction. All right, well, okay, all right, and then it goes, another day goes by, and another day goes by. It's like what, like 5 or 6 days?
It feels like it. Yeah,
it goes on longer than you would think, and it's this very slow, because at first they're not even caring about the fact that there may or may not be a witch there. They're literally like, okay, because it shows a rationality of like, okay, I mean, yeah, it's got to be over there somewhere. And then what's so funny is at a point, well, it's not really funny, but it is kind of funny, is they're like, we got to get the camera back today. It's like, I think that's the least of your problem right now. But, and they eventually realize that, and they're like, we literally don't care. We're not even going to survive this.
But then there's the impulse that they question Heather about, like, why are you still filming any of this? Like, we don't even care about a movie anymore. We're just trying to survive.
Yeah. And that's what works about the movie so much, is in 80 minutes, how long it still feels. It doesn't feel like it happens really quickly. It's like this very slow break of reality and break of hope.
Yeah.
And obviously what works so much about it is that mystery of, somebody wrote this, I want to go to it actually, what they said about the movie. This guy who's known as Arbogast Video Theater, I think, on let me see if that, on Letterboxd. He's written multiple reviews for this movie. I want to read one of them though.
I know he's somebody you like because you read some stuff from him.
Yeah, he said at the end, this is the best I've heard somebody read about it. I'm going to read the last paragraph. He says in one of his reviews, ultimately what makes it a masterpiece of horror is that it actually finds a modern way to go back to the roots of the genre. It revives the fear of the unknown by making it real. It puts us face to face with our relation to the supernatural. It's a movie that highlights the primal sources of the genre. Concrete fear, superstition, the occult, weather conditions, the limitations of your body and your mind, and mainly, the fundamental fear of the totally unknown. Like a Frankenstein, Nosferatu, or The Haunting, or a myth or an urban legend, which is all the same thing, it suggests that somewhere out there in the world something wicked and unreal does exist, and once you tread into its beyond, you will vanish, swallowed whole by the something, and all that will be left of you is an incomprehensible mystery. It is horror as in the world gone askew or reality gone eerie. Death is not even the question, nor is violence or pain. Yes, you will die, and you may feel pain, but that's not what's scary. What's scary is that you will not understand what happens to you. You will be lost, and it will all be for real. I think that's the best anybody's written about the movie I've seen, of that question of not even understanding your own death.
Right.
Like, what is even happening to
me? And all we have left are these bits and pieces from afar, and we don't even really get to see
that we get to stand outside the movie and know more than they do, not being in the situation almost. But even still, we don't ever get to see what the Blair Witch looks like. And that's the thing that I like about the movie too, and that was compared a lot to Jaws and the filmmakers I think compared it to that as well, is that they're not showing what it is for most of it. The difference is there we never even get to see what it is. It's almost like it is literally a force of nature or a pure evil that is not incarnate in a human body. Mm-hmm. It's just a state of mind, or
almost like alien life in 2001. It's like beyond the realm of
and
witnessing.
Does the witch even exist is not even the point of the movie anymore. It does, but does it exist in a physical plane? Yeah. I think is a question that is too basic for the movie to even answer. It's not even interested in that, clearly, which is what works about it so well, is it's like, we crave seeing it.
Yeah.
And we don't get to, which makes it even scarier in the sense of, well, does it even exist in a physical realm, which makes it even scarier that it maybe doesn't. I don't know.
Right.
But what I think works about the movie so much that I wasn't expecting as much of, and every horror movie has its own themes and kind of things it's about. The movie you notice how much the movie talks about America as a concept quite a bit. Like, there's
she says some things like, "Oh, you can't get lost in America nowadays,"
and can't stay lost,
and whatever, they like make fun of that. Right. The second or third time she mentions that and starts singing. Was it America the Beautiful?
Well, they sing different American things.
Yeah.
And that idea of what a, first of all, ridiculous statement that is, and I'm sure she realized that right in her moment of death. I don't know, but that idea of what is America now, and I don't even look at that literally as what she says. Even I said this about the movie before I'd even seen it, and it was confirmed that the movie's a lot about technology can't save you, and like it's all about filming. Oh, well, we'll get it on camera, and we'll see what happens. And it's like they don't even get to do that.
There's some aspects to Poltergeist we're going to talk about with that too coming up.
And that idea of the technology in the modern world can't save you. You are going to die. It just depends on you of what it is. It just so happened that they tempted fate to the point where whatever it is, God, the devil, a woman, the forces of evil that do not literally exist in a physical plane, like I keep saying, or have determined that no, you will die and you will not understand why. Mm-hmm. And that idea of this going back, like he said, going back to basics about what fear really is and about the primal evil of the world, and kind of that looking at America as safe from that as a fallacy, and kind of how America was founded on blood and violence and evil in its own way, and that kind of being an undercurrent of all this too, about the Salem witch trials and
I was going to mention
the
that
occult
too.
in early America and kind of all
that.
Yeah,
obviously this is in Maryland, it's not in Massachusetts, but I was thinking a little bit about the Salem witch trials in terms of the legacy that's left in New England / the Northeast, as we now know and look back and go, that very, very, very likely was not a thing. That was something that people lied about to persecute other people.
Right.
But nonetheless, those myths endure, and I think one of my favorite things about this movie, among many things, is specifically the relationships and how, you know, they start off being pretty friendly or collaborating on this project, and then it becomes like light frustration and the blame game and the finger pointing. But then it's like, no, all right, but we really just need to work together and put all that aside. And then there's a few more times where resentments boil over, and then they keep trying to go back to that. And as an audience member, you're just put it all aside and agree to like put your differences aside and work together. And you're kind of anxiously rooting for that, even though deep down you know that this is not going to work out. And then eventually those relationships are not going to last anyways.
One person literally disappears, and all you can hear is him screaming, which probably isn't even him.
Right.
In that sense of, I know there's some theory that people talk about that Josh character disappears, which is just stupid, but there's some theory that he's the one who's literally causing all this to happen, like he's literally gone crazy. And
like from the very beginning, or like even
well, that's what I wonder too,
because
it's like, I don't understand, because it's like, well, there's all these other factors that are happening, like he's not making these certain noises or doing these things. But yeah, that's a whole theory that I think, I don't know, it just seems kind of stupid to me. But and that there is no supernatural thing going on. There clearly is something going on.
Yeah.
But and that's another thing about the movie too. There's things that happen at certain points. There's one point in the movie a lot of people point to when they're running away from the campsite, and she screams, "What the F is that?" and like kind of points the camera at just nothing for a second while she's running, of like things that even we don't see that they see, you know.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that's all to say that what I appreciate about that, there's that probably the scariest scene in the movie to me is that part where he's finally got the camera and pointing it at her and saying, "Here's your motivation for this scene," and saying like, "You're all alone and nobody knows you're here and no one is going to help you," and her just crying, and it's just this really like
disturbing.
Yeah, I hate to even talk about it because it just makes me feel sick. Like, and it's all dealing with these very basic things and these basic ideas. And I said the movie was made for nothing. I mean, I don't even know how much it would have cost to have even made.
I had it
the majority of it was probably in the marketing. I don't even know. Like,
so the budget is listed between $200,000 and $750,000.
Yeah, and that was literally like equipment, basic pay, and then probably because the movie did have a crew. I mean, you know, but which is another thing
making
that's
$250 million worldwide, which is obviously huge return.
Which is another thing that's so impressive about the movie, that you know it had to have more of a crew than it looks like because there's nobody there other than them. You know, that just sort of been. I know it sounds like a basic thing to do, but when you're making a movie like that, to have basically no slip ups at all and everybody be out of the way, that's because they're moving the cameras around. You know, a good little amount. So.
You did also mention Cloverfield in relation to this movie, which obviously also is a found footage movie. That's obviously produced at a larger studio level and has a director like Matt Reeves, obviously, but. How did Cloverfield? You had a good little comparison, I thought.
Well, I talked about this off air, but what I like about the difference in these is this in the sense of this very intense interpersonal horror of disagreements and literal survival in the woods. About, am I going to live through the most basic primal existence? Transitioned with, or paralleled with, or in contrast with Cloverfield, which is this big urban environment, this massive, obviously communal horror that's going on, and literally just saying, can we survive this in its own way? But that being a chronicle of the erosion of a city, literally in real time, is being totally different of two different things, and kind of
and there's also this relationship stuff going on in the background.
Well, what's most interesting about that movie is when it gets quiet. At a point in the first, probably I'd say 20 to 30 minutes of the attack of the alien on the city, there's all people everywhere. There's also, and then it gets dead silent, and there's nobody anywhere anymore.
Yeah,
that's when the movie I think gets most interesting, is when it's them alone, but it's in these spaces that are supposed to be occupied by people. Whereas this, it's like they're not supposed to be there at all.
Yeah,
this isn't a place that's meant to be for people. So that's an interesting kind of contrast between no one's supposed to be here versus there are people here. There are supposed to be people here, and so Both of those are great in their own way. I think this is better than Cloverfield slightly, although I think that is really good, strong.
That obviously
movie.
also is reacting in this post 9/11 disaster context that is not.
I'm almost
present
taking
with
that
this.
and doing that in a way.
And that also is more explicit about showing the monsters.
Yes, and
throughout.
also, and like I said, about showing, because of all the found footage, I guess, in a way that there is of 9/11, of personal experiences of seeing that, people having camcorders and filming it.
Yeah, very documented.
Not only for news, but just people themselves.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that being a version of that, too, whereas this feels like that idea of, like, another thing that it's kind of meta about the Blair Witch Project is that idea, let's get a camera and go out in the woods and film some stuff, you know.
Yeah.
And then it's like, what about that as an adult? What does that mean now? And then you go even further. It's like going out in the water. You go too far and then you can't get back, you know, and it's... I said what that Arbogast Video Theater guy said, I think, is the best I've heard somebody say about this movie, about going out too far and then you're trapped, and kind of what does that mean. And I said what the movie had to say about America is very, I think, sounds basic, but when you actually think about it, it's like this kind of idea of American exceptionalism being a fraud, and the modern world, the security of the modern world being a fraud. And like, I even heard that recently about this. Obviously, everybody ended up fine, I think, from this. But that Burning Man they just had, and everybody got caught out in the desert. And it's just like, you never hear about stuff like that anymore. You know, you think now it's like everybody be able to get in and out of there or whatever. You just fly helicopters there and get the people, whatever, you know. But that didn't really happen, and I don't really know why. But you heard a lot about that, of everybody being trapped. And it's kind of makes you realize how marginal and dependent on all kinds of factors our safety and security really is now, where the point where normally that's not ever a problem. But even in the 1990s, it was impossible for these people to be found, and that's another kind of inherent question. Their footage was found. Where was it found? Was it put somewhere, or was it what, you know? And then that's the whole question of, well, what happens after this? Like, you know, and which is another kind of horror about the whole thing too, is like, what's the next step? Like, you know,
Paranormal Activity was another big found footage movie that came out in, I think, 2009 or 2009. It premiered at a festival in 07, but then it came out in 09. That movie had a production budget of $15,000, but then a post-production of $215,000.
Now, you've seen that movie and I haven't, but I know that what is impressive to me about that movie is the idea of, okay, what about in your own house?
Right.
And kind of the idea of using baby cams and, you know, and stuff like that is really voyeuristic and strange when you think about it anyway, and then when you think about it in a horror context, it's really weird.
Yeah, I don't think that movie's as good as this, although I do think it's pretty strong, and I remember actually thinking the sequel was pretty good too, but I need to rewatch those.
Well, I wanted to say I remember when Paranormal Activity came out.
Obviously, by then, like, we'd had other found footage horror movies again, but I feel like after Paranormal Activity, there's been even more. I mean, that kind of
the fact that felt fresh was another version of this.
But then also that never purported to be real in any marketing context either, or was never mistaken for being real in the way that this was a little.
Not even like, well, that's similar. This is similar to the McPherson tape in the sense that there actually was, because I've talked about this before, I think, but the McPherson tape, quickly, the production of that movie was so weird. They were trying to get a lot of VHSs made of it. It was actually called UFO Abduction. It got called originally. That movie, I know, there were literally all the copies of the movie got burned in a fire. All the VHS, even the original copy of the movie was burned.
Man, the aliens were trying to hide the info, man.
But accidentally, there was a VHS of the movie that got sent out to some mom and pop store a little too early by mistaken, stroke of luck. Somebody took that VHS, chopped the opening off of it at credits, and sent it to these UFO conventions. And in the UFO community for about 5-ish years, that was seen as definitive proof of alien life.
Well, there was a huge boom of that in the 90s anyways, too, especially with the X-Files being obviously fictional show on TV.
And so the director, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but the director of the movie, somebody called him one day and was like, "Oh, are you the guy that made this thing?"
Dean
Alito, yeah. And he was like, "What are you talking about?" Because he had thought the movie was totally missing and was gone and there was nothing of it anymore. And he said, "Do you know what's even been happening to your movie?" And he's like, "No." He's like, well, people have like sent it into all this stuff, and people think it's real, and they are having questions about it. Now they remade it for TV in this thing called Alien Abduction Incident in Lake County after that, which was more money. That was actually, I think, the reason he quit filmmaking was because he literally had panic attacks at how much money he had to deal with, and it freaked him out more than just making the original movie, supposedly, or whatever. But all that's to say that movie had that too, that whole kind of thing of, oh, is this real, is it not real? And people thought that it actually was real, a UFO abduction. But I remember when Paranormal Activity came out and it was a big deal. I was going to speak, though, to the fact that I've finally come full circle in watching the Blair Witch Project. I'm going to name drop a person you used to be friends with on here, but I have this memory of Morgan Duncan, who you used to be good friends with.
Yeah, nothing wrong with that. No. Kind of drifted away.
Right, yeah. But I remember the first time I ever heard about this movie was hearing him talk about it. The Blair Witch Project.
I don't think I'd seen it by that point.
No.
Yeah.
And but I was vaguely aware. Then I became aware of it. It was in all these movie magazines, and this was in like the later 2000s or mid to late 2000s. It's in all these movie magazines, like Wizard Magazine would talk about it at some point, or it was in like Entertainment Weekly or whatever. And the legacy of that movie permeating the 2000s was just this massive. And obviously, we talked about Survivor as a whole TV show was partially inspired by Blair Witch Project about what if we actually took people and had this TV show where they survive on an island. And what's funny about that show is how upbeat
and Lost
it all
actually
is.
kind of comes out of
Lost
that.
Also, yeah. But how upbeat Survivor actually is. Right. I mean, I know it talks about, oh, I'm feeling sick and I'm not feeling good, but it's always within.
But it's about the triumph of the human spirit.
Yes,
that's what that show's
right.
about.
But it's funny if you tweak that slightly, how much of a different story that show could tell.
Yeah.
Which is this.
Yeah.
But it does feel weird to finally see this movie and to actually be really in love with it immediately, as far as really having known it for so long, but having not seen it, but for it to actually apply in ways I hadn't expected, and for it to actually be about things, is really an impressive achievement to me of a movie that can speak that way about 25 years later.
Right.
Just a little younger than me. Well, it would have been made, I guess, about around the time I was born. I guess that couple months after I was born, I assume, is when it was made, in like 1998.
So it says October 23rd, 1997.
Oh, it was actually that long. So it was made before I was born then, okay. So it had a whole kind of lengthy post-production, I guess. But anyway, yeah, very great movie, very impressive, very cool, very funny. TBS, very funny.
Yeah, I mean, it's a movie I've always liked. I know some people don't think it's held up as well, and they've been more impressed with later versions of found footage.
Okay.
I think it's terrific, and I think it holds up.
I don't think that. You should go watch the McPherson tape too, but whatever.
We wanted to give some brief thoughts also on the Only Murders in the Building, which we've been kind of watching for a few months now, I feel like. The third season just ended, and we kind of got caught up on it right before the third season dropped. Of course, it stars Steve Martin, Martin Short, and Selena Gomez. The plot, it's on Hulu, comedy mystery show. The plot follows three strangers with a shared interest in true crime podcasts who become friends while investigating suspicious death in their affluent Upper West Side apartment building and producing their own podcast about the case. So it's a show about podcasting, which
Which so funny because the show shows so little of that in the show.
Well, especially this latest season was like such an afterthought. We just want to briefly talk about it. I think the show's pretty good. I think the show mostly succeeds on the chemistry of Martin Short, Steve Martin, and Selena Gomez. I think we all immediately understand, Steve Martin and Martin Short going together because they've worked together plenty over the past, and they're both hilarious and of a similar generation. Selena Gomez is an interesting wrinkle to throw into that mix, and I think, them both being older and she being younger.
Selena Gomez is the type of person, though, she's good for this sort of role because she has this kind of wise beyond her years aura about her.
And she makes fun of them being old, but very clearly is more mature.
Well, even in
her
in her personal life, she seems that way too. But our mom. We watched it with our parents, and so
Yeah.
our mom was laughing about her voice all the
You
time.
kind of just get used to
right,
it.
but she's very. I don't understand why this is happening. It sounds very much not like a young person. It sounds like an adult or something.
And so it becomes a point, especially after the first season, you're like, I'm kind of cool if we just, like, it's a show about them hanging out in
it'd be better if it
an
were a
apartment,
sitcom.
you know?
Yeah.
But it's got to have this murder every season. And, you know...
This season was particularly interminable due to the fact that we had to have a musical. And it has to have these
Which obviously
songs
Martin
and-
Short's character is this continually failed musical
Continually
director.
failed, I like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just musical director, and so he's got
Incessant
this
failure, Martin Short.
You noticed his son was not really in this season at all, which, there's a whole drama about who's really the father of the son.
Well, it
or
actually
whatever.
was Nathan Lane, it turned out.
Right.
But, yeah.
But really deep down, obviously, we know
Teddy
Martin Short.
Demas.
Yeah.
One of the great names. It's like Nicodemus. Or something like
But, I think it's a good show. It's a fun show, especially if you don't take it
Very good show.
If you don't take it very seriously, you know what I mean? If it's just like this nice little...
so don't worry.
Well, I don't either. But, again,
I know what you
the
mean,
chemistry of the leads really are terrific. And, again, some of the characters absolutely get on my nerves, but overall, like, the characters in the apartment are these weird, unique, different voices and types.
I
What did you think about the show in general, the leads, but then also maybe like the mysteries themselves? Because
I
that's
liked the
something to
show
talk
early
about.
on a lot more than I do now, and the main reason is just due to oh my lord, just the repetitiveness of it. Just gets kind of tiresome.
Yeah.
I think that it's a show that it's like, and literally it's the font is like the New Yorker.
Yeah, very clearly.
It's literally like it's a New Yorker's version of a comedy show. Like, without naming names, I know a lot of people who moved up to New York in my life from here. They would think this is the best show ever or something. And these were people that were also really into musicals.
Yeah.
They're very much into the big lights, big city, pretty ladies. As Ric Flair once said, not from New York, we should say. Also from North Carolina. But I'm not happy to claim him, by the way. He's
not originally from North Carolina. Actually, he's like from Minnesota, I think. But he's lived here a long time. But anyways, he's billed as being from Charlotte, North Carolina.
Right. I'm one of those people. If you want him, come and claim him. I could care less. Same thing with Andrew Jackson.
Now his daughter, Charlotte Flair, from the Queen City, as they say when she enters.
Yeah.
You're rolling your own.
Well, just because Charlotte, Queen City, like
pretty ladies.
Pretty ladies. It's a very predictable show in a lot of ways, and really kind of tiresome in its genre trappings that it has to go through.
Well, I myself am not a huge fan of murder mysteries as a plot device. I mean, James Ellroy almost convinced me from reading both
Black Dahlia and Big Nowhere.
And Big Nowhere. I love those books a lot. To the point, I think, these things can be good. And then I see him elsewhere, I'm like, I kind of like his vision of what these are.
Because his is this hepcat hangdog, I got a boner on the train, kind of attitude,
And it's also very clearly about the time period.
and I'm doing hop in Charlie Parker's F-pad, that.
And I do think that
the death dog with the hog log.
he should be our next guest on the pod. Him and Vim should.
Yeah, I just let him sit and swap spit.
But what's the Rian Johnson movies?
Knives Out.
Knives Out. I thought Knives Out was actually good.
Knives Out was good.
That was. I thought that was a clever enough thing.
It had a plot device that was different.
Yeah, and Glass Onion I thought was fine. Whatever. But very.
I thought the ending was funny when they destroyed the Mona Lisa. That was pretty funny. Spoiler, I guess. I don't know.
But something in general, that's not something I really love. The show is very much about how, New York, the city that never sleeps. Like we just got the most interesting stuff going on.
Every episode opens with a narration from a character. And it's like, you think you know.
Yeah.
It's like, well, if I think I know every episode,
like
maybe
Adam
I do.
Copeland Edge, you think you know me, but
yeah. But no, it's like when it asked me the question of like, you think you really know about Broadway? It's like, I probably do actually. By now.
Also, I do think one of the funny, recurring themes is, Oh, who's the new celebrity living in the apartment this season?
Yeah,
it was like Sting,
and there was Amy Schumer, and then it was technically Paul Rudd as a person who doesn't really exist.
Well, he's a fictional actor
right.
who is a big deal in the world of the
right.
show. But then Meryl Streep came on this season. She was not involved with that, but she was a character. And of course, we're not like, especially that character. It makes us think for 2 seconds. Oh, maybe she's the villain. And it's like, no, of course she's not going to be.
Right.
I personally have been dissatisfied with all 3 resolutions to the mysteries. Didn't I literally predict it right before it happened in the end of season 1? Or it's like, we are all Tim Kono or something along those lines.
Yes,
that's literally what Martin Short
that's what
said.
we've laughed every. Now I felt like that one was
That's probably the best one actually
the best
out of the 3
season, just in general anyway, because you're getting to know these people. And I thought the second season was all right, and then this one was just kind of like what, but.
I think also, I agree, but wouldn't you admit we were just kind of ready to be done with getting all caught up with it by this 3rd season, especially watching all back to back?
Yeah,
I think the show would work better if you kind of took time between the seasons, as opposed to watching.
Like we did. Right, because it's that way with anything. If you watch it all together, it's like, oh god, that's how most people watch things now, though.
Yeah,
because they're stupid, and they can't remember the last 5 minutes ago. So I want to mention Michael Cyril Creighton, who is one of the people you don't like on the show, is Howard Morris, the cat-loving resident of the Arconia, whose cat died the same night as Tim Kono. I love this guy. I think partially because it aggravates you so bad, but I genuinely do think he is kind of funny.
Well, I will say he's grown on me a little bit.
No, I get why it's kind of annoying, but like, I just think
he's just someone who insists upon himself and inserts himself into everything.
Which I love that. That's the kind of person I want to be. I'm just kidding. One of the funniest things in this whole show, though, was when his cat Evelyn died.
Oh, and was that season 1?
Yes, and then he called his next cat Sevelin, by the way, which literally sounds like a comedy Bang Bang, like Fry Vault and all that crap.
Yeah.
Like, but then the cat he put in the freezer, and then there's a whole scene where Martin Short gets in the freezer and is messing with the cat, and something happens with it by accident or whatever. That was funny. But no, I mean it has. And then who's that woman that's always cussing all the time?
Oh, what's her name?
I'm looking here.
Gotta be effing kidding me. She says it points.
What's her name? Let's see. Uma. Jackie Hoffman is her name.
Oh, she's pretty funny.
I think she's in anything. Yeah, but she's like, you gotta be effing kidding me. Every 2 seconds, it's just like, oh my god, she was Mama Sita in the miniseries Feud.
So was she in Second City?
Yeah, she's Second City improv stuff. Let me see what other stuff she's in here. Hang on. Mo Money is the first movie she was in.
A Dirty Shame.
Oh yeah. Of course she was in that. Yeah, John Waters movie. She feels like a John Waters character.
Yeah, she looks like
Queer Duck the movie. Okay. You were so not invited to my bat mitzvah, a movie that's coming out this year.
Okay.
She was in Glass Onion, Knives Out mystery as Ma. I don't remember her in that, but Shiva Baby.
Mm-hmm.
Birdman she was in, Lady on Balcony. Let's see what else she's in on TV. PB&J Otter. Okay.
Oh, I remember that show.
Really?
Curb Your Enthusiasm. She's in.
Oh.
It was like that PB&J Otter was like on Disney Channel, I think. It was like a kids show.
Okay, I've never heard of that. Dilbert, the show. Okay. Which of crazy people. Strangers with Candy. That's always been a funny name, something. Late Show with David Letterman as Grandmama Adams one time. All right. Girls, American Dad, Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, Grease, Rise of the Pink Ladies, Assistant Principal McGee. Literally, if she was anything ever, she was the assistant principal in Grease, Rise of the Pink Ladies. Like,
which I almost want to watch, just because why not? I think it already got canceled.
Oh yeah, no, it was canceled within the first week. I think it literally was out, and everybody's like, "Yeah, this sucks," and they're like, "Okay."
How do these things happen? Like, where these
I don't know.
Oh, let's throw money at this thing, and they produce it, and it's big, and it's like, oh, we're done with it. I just don't understand.
It's like that any Guy Ritchie movie. Why is it happening? That's what I want to know.
Oh,
it's like King Arthur, Legend of the Sword. I said this to you at the time. You remember, right?
Yeah.
Well, he said that movie will make no money. Guess what? It was made for $175 million. I'm actually surprised by this. It made $148.7.
But that's clearly a flop on arrival.
Yeah,
though.
It's like you see movies like that, though, and you're like, oh yeah, there's no way.
Well, I hate to say it, but Charlie Hunnam's the lead, so I mean, it's only got a ceiling that's so big.
Well, the Ministry of Ungentlemanly. Oh, sorry, I fell asleep. The Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare.
Please get through this.
The Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare. Yeah, I mean, you look at all these movies he's made. The Gentleman, you remember that? It was like all these movies: Wrath of Man, Operation Fortune, Ruse de Guerre. I'm gonna have to see.
We didn't really say anything about it. What do you think about that trailer for that new Matthew Vaughn movie, Argyle?
Nah,
you don't think so?
No.
I think that has got a semi-interesting fact versus fiction element to it, but I'm probably not going to see it.
Even The Covenant.
That kind of got more notice, I know. I feel
even
like.
that, well, it made 21.8 million. I know it's a better movie than that. It looks like it. But even, my point is, even a movie that is like a military movie like this can't even make money now. And that's what I'm saying. It's like Guy Ritchie just box office poison or something. I don't know what the deal is.
I think Aladdin did pretty well. That probably bought him
rock and roller. Lock, stock, and two smoking
Look at Aladdin
barrels.
real quick. I think that did pretty
that
well.
Made a lot of money. Yeah, it was like, it was like $1 billion.
So that right there bought him a few years.
He was like, oh crap, and they're like, all right, let's do it. And he's like, okay. He made those Sherlock Holmes movies, of course. Don't forget.
Never did see those.
I actually think that is kind of an inspired choice to get Guy Ritchie to make those. He made that first one, and I don't remember a whole lot about it, but
I didn't see either one of them.
That was just in case you're wondering. The first Sherlock Holmes was literally a driving to DC movie, 8th grade, and I was like kind of watching it, but also kind of like rock and roller, I need you to do your lock, stock, and two smoking barrels.
Me and Philip love rock and roller.
Snatch, that name just kills me. Don't ever forget that. Because he's in some of his movies. Oh gosh, what's his name? Hang on a second, everybody.
Yeah, please, hang on.
Vinnie Jones.
Yeah, Vinnie Jones. Yeah.
Well, never forget he was a football player.
Yeah,
played for. He played for Chelsea at one point.
If he was that or a MMA guy.
No, he was a soccer player.
Yeah,
he was in the Crazy Gang. Is what they called it. It was in the Wimbledon FC. Basically, that was this whole kind of group of players that, it says, commonly associated with them because they're often cheeky and boisterously macho behavior, who are in the habit of playing frequent and outrageous practical jokes on each other and on the club's managers Dave Bassett, Bobby Gould, and Joe Kinnear, as well as many of the players' highly aggressive physical style of play and reputation for a lack of discipline on the pitch.
So they're crazy, literally a crazy gang.
Called the Crazy Gang, and it was like the notable members were Vinnie Jones, obviously the most famous one, Dennis Wise, Dave Basant, John Fashneau, and Laurie Sanchez. But that was that whole Wimbledon FC teams that were the Crazy Gang.
Don't forget, also he played Juggernaut.
Yeah, that's what I always think of him in. But yeah, then he was in a movie called The Midnight Meat Train.
I know Philip and I laughed about that for years.
This horror movie
I've not even seen it.
Based on a Clive Barker story.
Bradley Cooper in that, maybe?
Yeah. And Leslie Bibb, one of my favorite names. Tony Curran, Brooke Shields. Oh, Tony Curran, you remember him?
Yeah.
Stuff. Roger Bart. But yeah, and then Vinnie Jones.
Yeah.
But yeah, the Midnight Meat Train.
He's a perfect Guy Ritchie actor, though. He's British,
definitely.
He's boisterous.
Yeah, and he was in that Musketeers thing, MacGyver, Rise of the Foot Soldier Origins. Literally, what?
He's going to be in War Games 2023, probably.
But he played for Chelsea at one point, I remember. It was in the early 90s. And then he played for Wimbledon most of that time. And then the Queen's Park Rangers. And he played for Leeds at one point. Anyway, you're done. You're tired of this. Leeds won. Scumbags. Anyway, Scumbags. Only merged in the building.
What's next for this show? It's kind of dropping hints that it might go to California, which at least would be a change of pace.
This is a spoiler.
Yeah.
So I'm going ahead and telling you, if you don't want to hear this, don't worry. We'll just
don't worry, we'll not care.
And don't worry, I'll not care. That we're the Crazy Gang of podcasting. We're going to do what the hell we want to do. We're going to have a lack of discipline.
And Vim is also.
We're going to have a lack of discipline on the airwaves. Let me go ahead and tell you. the Mad Bomber of the airwaves, as I always call myself. Mad Bomber of the earbuds. I came up with that in a novel one time that you'll never read. That okay. So there's this whole character throughout the show played by what's her name? I just lost it.
She was on Glee.
I feel stupid because I'm
Jane Lynch.
Jane Lynch, yeah, duh. Jane Lynch as like a female, Saz Pataki, Charles's stunt double. What's really the most annoying name ever? Saz Pataki, Sazz Pataki.
Yeah. Pataki.
But literally, that she's like this. Basically, it ends with her death. She gets shot through the window of his apartment because she goes down to get. It's like, that's just stunt double. I thought it was him, and it's like, now we're gonna have to. Now we got to investigate her life.
We got to find out all about her.
About Saz Pataki. Literally, oh my god.
I know our mom, who's hates Jane Lynch, was like happy she's like good or something.
Yeah, well,
like
she is pretty annoying. I got to tell you, but
still to this day, every time I see her, I think of her in Walk Hard, and she's barely in that. She's like interviewing him in the 70s era when he's in his David Bowie phase or whatever.
Yeah.
And like
his Star Man phase.
And like, so she's barely in that section. And then, later during Beautiful Ride at the end where it's like flashing back about his whole life, it cuts back to that interview and she's like grinding on him and dancing or whatever. It's like, it clearly was not in that earlier or whatever. That's the first time I ever noticed her in anything. And so that's what I think of with
Interesting.
her.
But
it dropped a lot of hints that, California.
California, beautiful.
Don't you love in shows in New York and L.A., the only two places that exist are New York and L.A.?
Yeah.
I mean, and I love this. I love Seinfeld, but, that was about, like...
Well, and Mad Men saved itself from that. Right. Mad Men saved itself from that by the very end, literally doing the on-the-road Kerouac stuff.
Oklahoma, Killers of the Flower Moon era.
Right, and him literally like going through these small towns. And then what's funny about that too is it literally ends in Big Sur, which was a novel that Jack Kerouac wrote.
Right.
So that's clearly
well, that was a huge place in the culture.
Right, but but I do think it is interesting that the show finally goes, hang on, wait a minute. Let's actually go through this area of the world and look at this. And then
that's where Don's from.
Right.
Himself,
yes. So he's always been fleeing from that anyway because he's from Pennsylvania.
By way of Illinois, as he told somebody one time.
Right. But anyway, he... and then what's funny about that show is him dealing with those types of people is they're like... It's like that scene in... It's kind of like the inverse version of this. It's like the scene in McKay and Mrs. Miller where he's like, if a frog could fly, it wouldn't. If a frog had wings, it wouldn't bump its ass so much. You follow me? And one guy's like, "Oh yeah," and then like
Michael Murphy,
the Michael Murphy character's like, "What the hell are you talking about?" Like, literally, he's like, "What?" Like, and it's basically saying that no, you're not going to be able to deal with me in the same way you deal with people in New York City. Like, I'm not an idiot. Like, and they see him as idiots, but he's like, those are actually real people. And it's like, nah, you're not going to deal with me in the same way of like, it's that thing with the guy who was in Last Days of Disco, who's like, who the heck are you? And like, and literally like, I know we're just talking about Mad Men at this point, but hey, spoiler, we might be doing that someday.
Yeah.
But that he's like, only Jesus can help, and he's like, listen, and he's like, don't come back. It's like, he's like, I'll offer Jesus, and then all right, whatever, goodbye. It's just one of the most realistic approximations of rural living I've ever seen because I live around here of like, Jesus, but I'm going to treat you negatively though.
Yeah.
And being honest about that and being like, okay, yeah, you know what, screw you. I don't actually care about you. Get out of my life.
Yeah.
Like, you know.
Go ahead. Get out of my
Which
face.
is kind of the same thing in an urban environment too. It's just a different attitude. Anyway, Only Murders in the Building. I'm glad it's gone, and I'll watch it when it gets back, I guess. I don't know. It just gets kind of tiresome after a while. So.
I mean, Martin Short, he's really one of my favorite comedians ever. I think he's so hilarious, and I think he's to me the winner of the show. I mean, I think Steve Martin's great, and Selena Gomez is really solid too. But Martin Short, anywhere, anytime, is just great to see. So he's my favorite aspect of it. But we got to get into the movies for today.
Mm-hmm.
Poltergeist.
Grandpa's got to get a little bit frisky today.
Here is the trailer for 1982's Poltergeist.
The house looks just like the one next to it. And the one next to that. And the one next to that. A young couple live in it.
Give Ken a kiss.
You are so obnoxious.
With their 3 children.
Of course, you have honey, chew each bite 10 times.
And something more.
They're here.
Sweetie, remember last night? Do you remember when you woke up and you said you were here?
Uh-huh.
Well, who did you mean? Who's here?
TV people.
Something's funny going on here next door. Something,
We were wondering if maybe you had experienced any disturbances lately.
What kind of disturbances?
I don't know what hovers over this house. I've never sensed anything like it.
That thing is in there with my baby!
They're hungry.
Now Steven Spielberg crosses a frightening new threshold into a world within our own. Its form is revealed.
What is it?
Its focus is clear. And the games are over. Poltergeist. It knows what scares you.
This movie is a Steven Spielberg production. Levi.
Yes.
I don't know if you heard that.
Yeah.
But it is. So Poltergeist from 1982. Levi, why don't you introduce that to us?
Poltergeist is a 1982 American supernatural horror film directed by Tobe Hooper.
Or
and written,
was it?
Well, we're going to get to that. And written by Steven Spielberg, Michael Grace, and Mark Victor from a story by Spielberg. You're hearing a lot of Spielberg here. I'll give you a second. Stars Jo Beth Williams, Craig T. Nelson, and Beatrice Straight, and was produced by Spielberg and Frank Marshall. Spielberg. Steven Spielberg, as they say. That's that. You ever see that, quick to further prolong this introduction, Poltergeist, you ever see that AVGN where he's talking about when it was in the Castlevania games where they're like intentionally making up these fake horror movie names like Bela Lugosi or Boris Karloff and stuff that's similar to that. That's like calling Steven Spielberg Steven Spielberg.
Yeah.
It's like, it's not funny. Children don't think that's funny. Aliens don't think that's funny. Like, I'm going into that.
Yeah.
Anyway. Anyway, the film focuses on a suburban family whose home is invaded by malevolent ghosts that abduct their youngest daughter. So, obviously, it should be noted Spielberg was contractually... let's go ahead and get this out of the way. There's a lot of debate over this movie about who directed the friggin' thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, let's figure that out right now. We're going to figure it out on this podcast.
Yeah, you heard it here first.
As Spielberg was contractually unable to direct another film while he made E.T. the Extraterrestrial, Hooper was selected based on his work and his name, probably, because Hooper, based on his work on the Texas...
So you think he saw a list of possible directors
and he's like, Hooper, where are you?
Yeah.
What? Hooper, you idiot, starboard, ain't you watching it? But was selected based on his work on the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and the Funhouse, because he had made the Funhouse slightly before this. Spielberg conceived Poltergeist as a horror sequel to his 1977 film Close Encounters of the Third Kind titled Night Skies. However, Hooper was less interested... Hooper, where are you? Where's your interest, Hooper? Was less interested in the sci-fi elements and suggested they collaborate on a ghost story. Accounts differ as to the level of Spielberg's involvement, but it is clear that he was frequently on set during filming and exerted significant creative control. For that reason, some have expressed the view that Spielberg should be considered the film's co-director or even main director, though both Spielberg and Hooper have disputed this. It was a major critical and commercial success, becoming the eighth highest-grossing film of 1982. In the years since its release, the film has been recognized as a horror classic. There were sequels The movie did make $121 million, almost $122 million on a $10.7 million budget. But yeah, we'll go there first before we get to the actual things about the movie and go to the cast. That it seems to me, first of all, that is an important thing to mention, is it was first kind of envisioned as a more of a horror sequel.
Well, almost a side project to Close Encounters.
Right, which was kind of then split up, and those kind of elements he wanted to do were sent over to E.T., and then this movie became a go. That is a major creative decision by Tobe Hooper in that sense of saying, no, actually, I think we should do this instead and do a ghost story movie.
Which I think worked out perfectly because we got E.T. and then we got this. We got two different projects.
But saying that, does this feel like a typical ghost movie? Exactly. And it does in the sense of it being a haunting, but I feel like a lot of special effects don't feel very different for a ghost movie.
I think this goes into another aspect of the movie, I think, is that one thing I really like about this movie, and this was our first time seeing it, both of us, we've never seen it before, was it felt like, I kind of wrote down here, a tentpole horror flick, and what I mean by that is usually, as we talked about with Blair Witch, horror usually works best at the margins. Now, obviously, Blair Witch is a much more at the margins than, say, Halloween or, say, movies that are kind of sort of studio movies or independent but still functionally a traditional movie in form that then get to be successful, should they be successful. This movie is engineered as a Steven Spielberg product. Now, a Steven Spielberg product in 1982 demanded a certain level of attention that is inherently almost antithetical to the way horror typically works.
Yeah.
However, this movie is, I think, so well made on a technical level that you just respect it. And you think of it more almost as this studio genre movie than exactly being a horror movie, as you were kind of pointing out earlier. However, it is still a horror story, even though the form of it almost demands us and lets us know that we're not in the danger of seeing something truly horrific ever happen in this movie. Do you feel that way?
Yeah, because
when you're watching it?
Because I feel like that was one thing the movie could have been better about, is being a rated R movie more than it was. And I mean, it's pretty hardcore for a PG movie, but there's a certain amount that the Jerry Goldsmith score isn't a John Williams score, but it feels kind of like one. Yeah. There's the sense
watching the trailer,
there's a sense that there's always a safety net.
Yeah,
somewhere there.
You think that's bad for horror to have a horror movie? Typically?
No, I mean, generally yes. In this case, I don't think it matters so much because you normally don't see movies like that.
Yeah. And it's being the Steven Spielberg product that it's inherently, and I say this as somebody who respects him as one of the premier filmmakers of all time, it's not going to have that level of danger naturally because that's not what he's interested in terms of providing.
Right, and I think that's fine. For most movies that wouldn't work, but like I said, since it's a Spielberg movie, I don't really have that big of a problem with it. But that is something to think about, especially with how little there is actually shown of the ghosts in this. But I will say this: when the ghosts are there, it's like there's the big moment at the end when the ghost kind of comes out of the door, and it's this big, it almost looks like the Mummy, the 1999 Mummy anthropomorphized as
anthropomorphized.
Yes.
Yeah.
Ghosts that haven't been exorcised. When I was a kid,
give them a gym membership.
So I was going to say, when I was a kid, I thought it was like the ghosts that haven't exorcised, and I was like,
ghost.
Yeah, poor devils. That's death for the dead. But
it's all in the handbook.
Keep moving. I mean, I watched that movie again this week because I've never seen it before. But anyway, that was genuinely frightening and kind of like a shocking image to see. It's weird to see an ILM image look that scary looking because normally you see it as this even stuff in Star Wars. It's
or it's something like in Jurassic Park where it's going for photorealism, not necessarily something
but this
surreal
is and it looks kind of like a cartoon ghost in its own way, but there's just something about it that is immediately oppressive and angry and scary looking that it shouldn't be that much based on what it literally is. But yeah, I think it mostly works off of that, about things that are kind of like, oh, this is weird, or this is kind of scary, but could have been more, I think. But ultimately, that's not what the movie's about. The movie's more about the family itself and what they're going through, and kind of and those are the themes, is kind of the American family in suburbia. And what do you do? And it's kind of a similar thing with Blair Witch Project, about what do you do about these eternal problems?
Yeah.
And technology can't be the savior for that.
Right.
You know.
Okay, so this is my theory on what happened with the Spielberg, Tobe Hooper situation.
Yes.
So I'll run this by you.
All right.
Let me know what you think. Now, I've not read thoroughly into this, but this is based on things I have heard. This is what I assumed happened. So, Spielberg, he's obviously consumed with making E.T. That's the movie of the year, and what his follow-up to Raiders of the Lost Ark is going to be. And again, this had been in development. The E.T. and this kind of split off and became these two different things. So he's off making E.T., consumed with that. He picks Tobe Hooper, obviously, because of his name in horror. We haven't really mentioned, we've done a whole podcast on it, but Texas Chainsaw Massacre obviously was what he did before that, one of the biggest hits of the 70s, and one of the most important movies of the horror genre by this point. So, and now you recently also had seen... what was that movie you've seen recently?
Oh, Eaten Alive.
And you were not impressed with that.
No, I thought that came
after Texas Chainsaw, right?
Yeah.
And that had more money behind it. It was a little more of a...
Yeah, the thing about that movie, I'll talk about it briefly. I mean, that movie was basically built on the premise of surrealism inherently.
Yeah.
It looks really interesting, I'll say that, because it's supposed to be this motel, and it's like not like Texas Chainsaw Massacre where it's out in the boonies somewhere. It was shot on a soundstage in Los Angeles somewhere in Hollywood, and it looks that way. It looks weird. It feels weird. But that kind of robs what was so fascinating about the original, about Texas Chainsaw Massacre, about what it looked like and what its intent was, and that sort of thing. But as far as that was just, first of all, way more pointless. The violence happens immediately, and it just continues throughout. There's no thematic resonance that the Texas Chainsaw Massacre has. It's just a very big, dumb exploitation movie. It just really is a stupid, pretty interminable movie in a lot of ways. What this did that it didn't do, and what Texas Chainsaw Massacre originally did do, was actually make it about something. And I feel like that's where he works best, is when he's got something to deal with.
Also,
I haven't seen the Funhouse, so I'm not sure what the deal is there. But
I forgot that he directed Salem's Lot, the miniseries, which I've read the book. I've not seen the miniseries. Right. Have you seen the miniseries?
Yeah.
Did you like that?
Yes, it was all right. I mean, it wasn't as good as the book, obviously, but how would it be? And
I forgot also he died on your birthday, August 26, 2017. So I think, like, obviously most of these movies he had made before this, I mean, Salem's Lot would have probably been the biggest thing up to this point. But he was not familiar with working in a bigger budget. And so, but Spielberg, respecting his horror background enough, said, I think you'd be a good fit for this. Yeah. Spielberg then went off to do E.T. Rumors are, and reports say, that he was overwhelmed and intimidated by how big and technical this movie was. Yeah. And I think Spielberg came on to, he was already a producer, so he already had a place to be there on set anyways.
Yeah.
But kind of being Spielberg in 1981, just inherently being who he is, kind of like did, no pun intended, ghost direct this movie.
Yeah.
It does have the imprints of a lot of other Spielberg products, and that he and Tobe Hooper have kind of stuck to their stories about this to save Tobe Hooper embarrassment from, you got your movie taken away from by Steven Spielberg.
And, let me say about that. It's kind of the same thing we were saying earlier about Dean Alito with making the McPherson tape and then making the Alien Abduction for TV. That there's these certain artists like that, and it should be said, by the way, that Dean Alito was very, very influenced, and his favorite movie was E.T.
Yeah. And
so that was what inspired him to do that. What's kind of funny about that, he was so inspired by E.T., he's like, let's make a horror version of that, kind of, but whatever, which is a very obvious thing to do.
Poltergeist kind of is,
right.
But whatever.
But, yes, in its own way. But I think it is interesting because you watch a movie like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and then you even see with Eaten Alive, even also, it's like the more money, the more problems. It's strange. It's like because you see a movie like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and he's the director. He's part writer, along with Kim Hinkle, primarily was a writer, and she was a big collaborator of his. He made the music.
Yeah.
He just did everything, you know. And then when it's like you get more people involved, it's like they get more confused and more, you know. So there's certain artists that work that way where they're like, just let me do this thing, and it's way more successful when it's just like Texas Chainsaw, for example, which is just like such an immediate, definitive blast of exploitation filmmaking at its height. Of like, yes, this is cheap. Yes, it's about these very like cheap things and very kind of going for these cheap thrills
and cheap tricks
and cheap trick. Dream Police, the Dream Police. So awful.
Dream Police kind of in this.
They're kind of inside their head. Every single. Anyway, but that is interesting to me. There's like the more successful movies are these that are smaller like that, you know. And
obviously Spielberg's an example of someone who graduated.
Yeah.
Continually, he got bigger budgets, and some people, and again, that's a skill. I mean, not everybody can do that in terms of
and that's
being
what I'm saying,
able to like have a personal vision imbued in something that is big,
right?
And that takes a level of communication skills that go beyond just a low budget movie towards something that is.
Well, it's the same thing happened with Martin Scorsese, who by this point was well established as a master director by 1992. But even he tells that whole story where he kind of had to ask, or 1991 I guess that was when Cape Fear came out. He literally kind of had to ask Spielberg, how do you film these like action sequences at the end? Because that's not something I'm used to doing.
And I think again, he of course could have done it. He just was intimidated because he never quite done anything like that.
So that's what I'm saying though. I understand that in Hooper's case, where he's just, you know, a great filmmaker, but he's I don't know what to do with all the resources that I have. I'm more used to telling stories this way. And so, yeah, like I said, that's probably the be all and end all on that, is that he just came in and helped envision what was going on, and by nature of that, left his stamp on the movie more than would normally be the case.
I think the reason we ask these questions all these years later, because some people are like, well, what does it matter? Like, says he's the director, but like, this resembles a 1982 Amblin Spielberg product far more than it resembles Texas Chainsaw Massacre or something that we see as
or Eaten Alive or probably even The Funhouse, I'm assuming.
And so this just very clearly more resembles something from Spielberg.
Because Tobe Hooper has a definitive style that I can recognize, and I don't recognize it so much in this. So
and there are directors who have enough creative control that make a studio movie that doesn't quite feel like them, but by all accounts are like, no, I made the decisions here. And sometimes that's like naturally your style coheres to what the form is.
Yeah.
But I think undoubtedly we see Spielberg's presence is so heavy on this, which is why we say that.
Right.
Speaking of Scorsese real quick, this gets to this point a little bit. I remember he told a story about working on The King of Comedy, which was fascinating. That, and this is a weird thing to say, but that by that point in his career, Jerry Lewis was like the biggest outside name he had ever gotten to be in one of his movies. Now, I know we hear that and go, that's Robert De Niro up there, but they came up
at
together.
That time,
you know,
right.
And obviously a version of this happened with Paul Newman later with The Color of Money.
Yeah.
But that, like, that was the first time he realized, like, they were making the movie, they were on take 40, take 50, you know, whatever him and De Niro were doing. And Jerry Lewis was kind of like looking at his watch and standing there on set and thinking like, am I good to go now? Do you need me anymore? And that was like a shocking moment for him because he's like, oh, like every other movie I made up to this point is everybody's hanging out and everybody's of a certain generation and we're all doing this together. And he realized, oh, like I'm working with a professional. And he wasn't even saying that to like insult Jerry Lewis in any way. He said he needed that humbling to go, oh, like I'm working with a talent who is not exactly
talent in quotes, yes.
Yeah, I agree. But is like he's generationally not up with us. He's an older guy, and so he is not going to be here to try out things. He's here to do his lines and leave. And that was an education for him in terms of working with stars. That he spun, like he said. Well, I think he said he had better things to say about Paul Newman as far as working with him, but.
Paul Newman would be willing to sit there and do that.
Well, he was a filmmaker too. Well, I guess Jerry Lewis was too, but we didn't know what Orson Welles said about him as a filmmaker.
Well, he comes on as a great thinker, which must be stopped.
That pause is what gets me. But anyways, like that's something that some filmmakers mature into understanding, and when they do different things, because again, you think about his movies before that, it was like Mean Streets or Boxcar Bertha or Taxi Driver or Rachel. It's like with this stable of people that he knew and that there was this community behind. And then all of a sudden he's working with Jerry Lewis, who's this established showbiz name, and he's like, oh, he's for the project, but he's not, quote, with us in that way. And so oh, yeah, please leave. I'm sorry I kept you or whatever. He felt bad about it. But anyways, that speaks worse of Jerry Lewis than anything, I think. But anyways.
Well, there's enough bad to say about Jerry Lewis. We won't bog you down
But
with that.
Poltergeist, movie of the moment.
Yeah.
I think one of the greatest things about this movie is the family.
Yeah.
Is the relationships they have, the bond that they have. And
you want to go through that cast really quick, because I feel like we can just talk about him in general, but Craig T. Nelson's the father, is Steve Freeling, the mother, Jo Beth Williams as Diane. Beatrice Straight is... Oh, well, hang on. We'll go down a second. Dominique Dunn is Dana Freeling. She's the girl that gets kidnapped. Oliver Robbins is Robbie Freeling, and then Heather O'Rourke... Actually, no, I'm sorry. Heather O'Rourke as Carol, and Freeling is the girl that gets kidnapped. Dominique Dunn...
She's the oldest daughter.
...was the oldest daughter. She actually died that year. Did you know that? I think she was murdered by her boyfriend or something.
Oh, really?
That same year, so R.I.P. to her, Or no, by strangulation,
Oh, gosh, I didn't know that.
That literally happened like that.
I was wondering, when I saw her, I was like, I don't think I've seen her in anything before, and then I didn't know that.
But there's a whole thing on here it talks about her ex-boyfriend,
Okay.
They had an argument in the driveway of her West Hollywood home, and he strangled her or something. But, so that's a random thing I had done. Well, I had heard about that. There's that whole theory about the movie that people talk about, all the bad things that have happened, that kind of poltergeist curse or whatever, to people. I know that's one of them. Mm-hmm. But, I do like the family. I think is very well defined. I like that Dominique Dunn, to speak of her briefly, because she's not in the movie a whole lot. But you do get this sense of, like, the older daughter who, like, acts very aloof and, I'm going to go out and do this and I'm going to go out and do that. And then her reactions to her family going through this are very realistic of, like, breaking down over that and, like, feeling just as bad as everybody else, kind of.
One thing I thought was very interesting was the parents in this, like, basically being, like, you could tell they were, like, these California, not exactly hippies, but, like, baby boomers who are aging into being parents because they're like smoking pot and like they're a little more of a modern depiction of what parenthood would have been in
most
1982.
modern in a big budget movie like that,
in a California way too. Didn't you think too, and this is what connects it to E.T., that like the suburban area looks like it could be like a few blocks away from the where the characters are in E.T. in terms of that suburban development, and so there's naturally this weird, almost a movie that's happening at the same time as that is. I mean, is what it feels like.
Yeah. There's obviously a nicer development than that.
Now that younger daughter, what's her
Heather
name again?
O'Rourke.
Plays, what's the character's
Carol
name?
Ann.
So she's like one of the biggest marketing things about this movie, because she of course says the famous line, "They're here."
Well, she's a blonde-headed girl, so she's a very striking image to put on.
I wonder
posters.
to what extent too that this was in any way inspired by or in conversation with Danny from The Shining, because she is. I know Spielberg had not great thoughts about that when it originally came out, but has since grown on it. But that like child who is able to channel and talk to spirits in this other way, that was a trope you were seeing a decent amount around this time, and she's another version of that.
Yeah.
Craig T. Nelson, I saw you had his Wikipedia page up. I most think about him from Coach. I watched that at our grandma's house years ago.
We all think of him, younger of us also think of him in The Incredibles.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, he plays Mr. Incredible. I forgot about that.
Mr. Incredible.
He has a good voice for that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Very... real Tim Allen.
It's like Tim Allen meets Adam West Batman almost, but more inherently self-aware comedian.
But he's getting, and Jo Beth Williams, who's been in a lot of different things. I think of her most in, honestly, this and Kramer vs. Kramer. The Big Chill also, of course, I forgot about that.
She been in some Woody Allen movies too?
Maybe, let's see. Let me go down.
Was she in Heather and Her Sisters? Or am I thinking of
No.
I'm thinking of somebody else.
Stop or My Mom Will Shoot.
That's a good title.
We've seen the poster.
Mm-hmm.
Dutch. Remember Dutch?
No, never seen that.
Well,
never knew that existed.
That's your loss.
Well, Craig T. Nelson. Go back to that poster for a second.
Well, hang on, I can't see where it is. Okay.
Oh God, what's his name? Ed O'Neill. They should have been in something together.
Booty time. Booty time. Yeah.
But they're just like kind of Joe America dad types. You know what I mean? Around this era, but.
Yeah, but no, she's also, I said, really good in this, I think. And then, wait, what?
Teachers.
What are we called? Teachers. With Nick Nolte, Joe Beth Williams, Ralph Macchio, and Judd Hirsch. Square dancing. I've been thinking about that a lot last few days. And then little Robbie, he's
not a huge presence.
No, but he has it. It feels like the movie's kind of seen through him at a certain point.
He's got a lot of Star Wars merch, that's for sure.
Well, think about it this way, because like the girl has to be kind of mysterious because she's going to disappear anyway into the television. Well, sort of. I don't know. I want to talk also about literally what are the mechanics of this movie later, as far as like not even that they're wrong or dumb, just what is going on, literally. But that because she's going to go away, so you can't rely too much on her point of view. You can't rely too much on the parents either, so you're looking at it through his point of view mostly, especially early on about what's that tree doing there, and like, you know, I'm a Star Wars fan, and I'm a little boy, and like, you know, kind of like, except not to that level, Elliot and E.T.
Yeah.
But yeah, that.
You know, I recently watched rewatch. I've seen it before, Paris, Texas, with my girlfriend Lainey for the first time for her. And I was thinking about Poltergeist, and I was thinking about E.T., and that movie came out in '84. But like, if you were a young boy in the movie in the '80s, you were into Star Wars, and obviously that was what the culture was. But like,
was there Star Wars stuff in that?
Yeah, like he's got Star Wars bed sheets, the kid in it, and he says something about in the galaxy far, far away. So there's very clearly kids of this era in general, as we know, but in movies in particular, you see Star Wars in the background of a lot of stuff. I really love it's almost more part of the narrative in E.T. because you literally get him wanting to talk, you know, to a Yoda costume, and then you got one of my favorite scenes in all movies is
him showing him all the stuff.
Him showing him his action
and he's
figures,
just sitting there like looking at him like he's plotting his next move or something like.
He's like, this is Lando, and it's like, you know,
this is Greedo and Walrus Man. I love Walrus Man.
Hammerhead,
Walrus Man.
Yeah.
But so the movie's kind of seen in a certain way through him, at least in the beginning of it, and then it kind of. Well, then you have the introduction of all these other characters. We'll go through them a little bit quicker, but you have Beatrice Straight as Dr. Lesh.
She's very famously in Network for us, anyways.
Right.
She has a great performance in that.
Also, Michael McManus, I think he's one of those guys too. Richard Lawson, who has been in a lot of random stuff. He was in Dirty Harry, and he's been in a lot of different movies. I'm trying to think what some of the other ones are. Coming Home, he was in. Scream, Blackula Scream, one of my favorite titles. Wag the Dog. How Stella Got Her Groove Back. Streets of Fire. That's what I was thinking of.
We said something about that when we were watching.
Yeah, Maniac McGee.
What an event when that premiered on Nickelodeon! I remember.
From Zero
Rip
to
Torn.
I Love You, a pretty new movie. Always a Bridesmaid. Searching for Neverland as Joe Jackson.
Okay.
Whoa! Wait a minute.
Yeah.
So he played Joe Jackson in Searching for Neverland movie.
I forgot Joe Jackson was even dead. That's what it was.
I don't think anybody.
He's like one of those vampire types, so I felt like he was going to live forever.
Yeah, well, thankfully not. And then of course, kind of what the movie bets the farm on towards the end is Zelda Rubinstein as Tajina Barons, who's this paranormal parapsychologist or paranormal or spiritual medium rather, who comes in and knows all these random things. I think she is really good in this, though. I love there's like those line reading she has, like when she's saying she's wanting to try to get in communication to see where Carol Ann is in the house, and she's saying to Craig T. Nelson's dad, like, you need to be forceful with her. yell at her. Like, it's like, tell her you're going to give her a spanking. Like, it's really weird, like, almost Southern
it's like
grandma.
Weird Southern aunt.
Like, and it's like, but, she's a very interesting presence that I think.
Yeah, it kind of comes out of nowhere towards the end.
And then kind of leaves again, and it's kind of just like, oh, okay.
To what extent Otho was inspired by her. Or obviously Beetlejuice was another movie I was thinking about being partially inspired by
I was thinking that a little bit too, but yeah, Otho, yeah.
Her and Otho having a game show together, that'd been something.
It's Otho. I mean, what was he said? So few clients have been so few clients are able to read my mind. They're just not open to the experience. But Viridian. Now, why do I know that name? Blue-green, hydrated chromic oxide. Remember, I was schooled in chemistry. I was a hair analyst, huh? Well, briefly. Well, he's like, don't worry, only a little while. I was.
But all these, characters come in. They're from outside.
Well, that's what I was gonna say. That's what's interesting is that the family stays there, and there's this transience of characters that come in and out of the movie. Normally, you wouldn't
basically
see
say
that.
All the kids got to leave because we don't want them.
Normally, you wouldn't see that in a horror movie. Normally, it's like you get the one right tool, as they say. But this is more realistic in the sense of, in a family crisis, when you have something like this going on, you have these people that act like they want to help, or they really do want to help, but then they can't, and then they leave, but the family's still stuck with the problem. So it's like, I'm interested in that idea. This movie plays on that the way other movies don't, of like, these people come in and out of the situation, and it feels very realistic in that way.
Yeah.
And there's a couple other characters here, but nobody really.
But so we could get into the horror of what's going on here. So basically, this housing development, of which Craig T. Nelson, what's he again? He's like a.
So he's like a. Okay, so I wanted to find this because he's the guy who's like one of the people who works for the housing development. He's like basically a real estate agent.
I was gonna say he like sells properties.
He sells the properties there, and so he has a really nice house that they gave him based on his abilities to do that. And his boss, I'm trying to remember because he's that guy that's in Mulholland Drive.
He looks like Robert Mitchum almost.
Yeah. Hang on. You go ahead and talk.
But so like they are like he finds out maybe midway through or maybe 2/3 of the way through the movie that these housing developments are being, basically are paved over cemeteries, and that they've moved the bodies. In some cases, they haven't moved the bodies, and that basically that these housing developments are being built.
Yeah, James. To jump in quickly, James Karen is the actor's name. He was in this, The Return of the Living Dead. I remember he was in. That remake of Invaders from Mars, The Pursuit of Happiness, and then what I randomly think of him in most is Mulholland Drive. As that Wally Brown, he's in. Yeah. Remember, he's in that scene where they're doing the whole.
Where Naomi Watts does their audition.
The audition, but anyway, and he was in Wall Street.
I remember him from that.
Yeah, I do remember that. The Unborn, one of my favorite titles for a movie.
But so they basically, and that plays on popular horror tropes of like, buried on an Indian burial ground, or as what The Shining kind of.
This it was a little less specifically as an Indian burial ground.
No,
as
it was more
just
of
like,
a cemetery.
It's just a cemetery,
generally,
right?
Yeah. And so it's the idea that their spirits are obviously angry that they've been disrupted, and are then trying to haunt the people in this neighborhood, and in particular this house, that was obviously unaware of that this happened, but that they're naturally complicit in the affordability of these places in these suburbs. Right. That the affordability of modern life is built on the bones and the spirits of these past peoples.
Yeah.
In that way, there's a certain Killers of the Flower Moon similarity, I suppose. But just that, and they're being haunted by them. And I think one of the most inventive things about this movie is it using television, the famous idiot box, as the conduit for evil. And then there's a lot of sometimes subtle, sometimes not so subtle political statements being made about Reagan-era America and like, Ronald Reagan is president. He's obviously he was the TV president. He came from.
Well, there's that scene where they have that book of it's like Ronald Reagan on it,
and like this idea that like that everybody's so obsessed with the TV, and in particular that kids are being obsessed by television, and kids being sucked literally and figuratively into television, and television in some roundabout way warping the kids' minds or captivating the kids to the point of them being literal prisoners within it in a roundabout way. What did you think about that as a device, or even just the whole burial ground aspect of being built on top of?
Yeah, well, it's a similar thing I said about Blair Witch Project, the idea that technology can't save you, or that even technology is a problem, or
as in, isn't this a literal conduit for evil to come through?
Well, I think that is what's most interesting about the movie, is just the visual language of ghosts tampering with suburbia, which feels now like a very obvious thing, but at that time, normally ghosts were always in places where they were supposed to be. Haunted houses, big castles, mansions. Yeah. Here it's like, well, no, you displaced these spirits that were here, so it doesn't matter what you put here, it's going to react to those things, Now, that doesn't feel as weird now, because you could easily say, in the amount of years that suburban living has been a thing, that, okay, this person got killed in this house, or they were killed themselves or something. So that kind of thing wouldn't work as well now, because, like, suburban and more modern life is such a part of horror movies.
Yeah.
At this time, though, that was still a big step, and I think that's why that's made the movie memorable, because of its use of modern technology of the 80s, which seems very old now. But I feel like the statement's still the same.
Yeah.
And to use television as this
metaphor,
or this way station for spirits, or spirit plane.
Well, I think that goes back to specifically white noise, or those the channel, we don't really have that as much now with streaming, in terms of that disruption or that dead air or that white fuzz, basically. But it was, very present in older TV, and the idea that there's some evil lurking within that, I think, is a very potent visual metaphor, which I feel like other movies have tried to do since then, but this really does in a way that's quite
superb. I turned on my TV at school the other day. I was showing some movies on VHS, because I just had some VHSs, and I put on the VHS, and it showed up on it was like a new big screen, flat screen TV, HD, and it had the static on it. I think that was, I wouldn't say that's the first time those kids have ever seen that, but they reacted to it differently than I would have, because I just kind of, it was weird to see that on a TV like that, but at the same time I was just like, oh yeah, it's just white noise from is sitting waiting.
Yeah.
But I could tell they were kind of staring at it like they didn't totally... Yeah. I wouldn't say they didn't know what it was, because I think, and I know this from experience, we think that younger kids are more culturally stupid than they actually are. Yeah. Usually they do know a lot of random stuff, but that is one thing I was kind of surprised by. Some of them were kind of looking at it like they were almost entranced by it, or they were just confused about what is that, or why is that doing this on this TV?
I've heard lots of old stories about kids staying up late just to watch that, because there's literally nothing else going on. And obviously, now we live in an age of 24-hour television where nothing really ever ends, and there's always something new and else. But I've heard stories about older generations that would sit up and literally just watch that late at night, because there's really nothing else going on. After and this movie depicted the sign-off of the national anthem and
American landmarks,
and I feel like there is something perverse about seeing that in 1982 being warped, and there's some evil lurking within that.
Right.
You know what I mean? And that idea that even those very monuments are themselves built on these cultural and excursions that have painted over and robbed people of their agency or dignity in terms of Native peoples, or in terms of African Americans. Mm-hmm. So, what I like about this movie is it's vague enough. You don't have to really look into that stuff if you don't want to. But at the same time, it has those signifiers that are there for a deeper conversation to maybe be had about what it represents or what it means. Again, this is a movie that is kind of iconic, but at the same time, it's kind of faded away in the way that
made a lot of money,
like
and
E.T. obviously still is very present in the culture. just as someone who had heard about it and knew about it for years and years, how was taking this in for the first time?
It was
It was new to me as well.
I thought it was really good. I mean, what I appreciated about it was the style of filmmaking was so expert. I mean, and part of that I think was, I said, Spielberg's input, but I think that Hooper probably rose to the occasion in that way and just did what he needed to do. And one thing about it I thought was funny is it's like, how is all this working and how do we know how the spirit plane works is not really a flaw more as it is just a question I had that wasn't really answered, I guess, is just where are these people going and how are they going there and how are the ghosts on this other plane but they communicate. I mean, that's just a question of general ghost stories, but that's just something that I
thought this had one of the actually best endings I've seen in a while of a movie in terms of the simplicity.
It's kind of funny, but it's also very serious in its own way too.
They made their way out of the neighborhood. They all survived. The family's reunited. They go to like this random motel basically, and all go into the room. But then there's this beat. There's a pause. And then Craig T. Nelson's character takes the TV from the hotel and puts it outside and then closes the door.
Yeah.
And it is like this kind of a sweet, satisfying ending in terms of, oh, they lived, they made it, but then there's this, nothing's going to happen, but there's just this presence and this knowledge of what happened.
Because the image of like the motel, it's on that like balcony ledge, and it's just sitting there, and the camera's zooming out, and the music's playing, but it's like it's still just sitting right there outside the room. And like I said, it's this knowledge that those things happen, and they could happen again. And there were sequels, so obviously I guess they did happen again. But even outside of that, that is a great ending. That's probably the best thing about it, because I actually remember seeing the ending of the movie before, because I mentioned that. I was like, you know what the ending of this movie is? And you were like, no. And I was like thinking of that it kind of made me laugh always until I saw it at the end of the movie, like I said, and it made you kind of think about it a little differently. But
So Poltergeist, we watched really terrific 4K. It looked really good. That came out recently. Any other last minute thoughts on?
No, really good, very good movie,
very good show. But now we got another movie to get to. Jumping ahead a little bit to 1999, another big ghost classic. Here is the trailer for The Sixth Sense.
You know the accident up there?
Yeah.
Someone got hurt.
They did?
A lady. She broke her neck.
Oh my God, but you can see her?
Yes.
Where is she?
Standing next to my window.
Baby, why are you shaking? Cole, what's wrong?
Did you ever talk to your mom about how things are?
I don't tell her things.
Why not?
Because she doesn't look at me like everybody else, and I don't want her to. I don't want her to know.
Know what?
I see dead people walking around like regular people.
I don't see anything. Are you sure they're there?
Sometimes you feel it inside, like you're falling down real fast. You ever feel the prickly things on the back of your neck?
Yes.
That's them. They get mad. It gets cold.
How often do you see them?
All the time. They're everywhere. They want me to do things for them.
I think that they know that you're one of these very rare people who can see them. So you need to help them.
What if they don't want to help?
I don't think that's the way it works.
How do you know for sure?
Is anyone there?
Look out! Please make them leave.
I'm working on it.
So Levi, again, when it comes to the 90s, just when we thought we were out, it pulled us back in.
Yeah, as always.
All right, so The Sixth Sense is a 1999, as we know, American psychological thriller film Which we can talk about the extent to which this is a, quote, horror movie.
Yeah.
Sometimes psychological thriller is just to say, oh, it's like too arty to be a horror movie or whatever, but we'll get into that in a little bit. Written and directed, of course, by M. Night Shyamalan. Stars Bruce Willis as a child psychologist whose patient, Haley Joel Osment, claims he can talk to dead people. This was released by Buena Vista Pictures, which is owned by Disney, so it's kind of a subtle Disney movie, believe it or not. Received critical acclaim, praise for cast performances, particularly those of Willis, Osment, and Toni Collette, atmosphere, direction, and surprise ending. The film established Shyamalan as a production assistant, the predominant thriller screenwriter, director, and introduced the cinema public to his traits, most notably his affinity for twist endings. The movie also was nominated for 6 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Director, Best Original Screenplay, all of which were for Shyamalan, which is massive.
Yeah.
That's only his 3rd movie, and he's getting that kind of interest.
That's first major movie.
Yeah. Best Supporting Actor for Osment, and even Best Supporting Actress for Collette, which I don't think I knew that. Second highest grossing film of 1999, behind, of course, Episode 1. So, the cast, again, Bruce Willis, playing the main character, child psychologist. Toni Collette, the mother of a troubled child. The troubled child played by Haley Joel Osment. And then also Olivia Williams, who, you might remember her. She's Max Fisher's love interest in Rushmore, which would have been just a little bit before this. Again, the movie has a budget of $40 million, which is a pretty big budget for what this is, but then grossed $672.8 million. So again, this movie caused quite a stir in 1999. I think I mentioned in the past that I hadn't seen this movie until some years later, like with Blair Witch, but I do remember it being a cultural moment and a cultural thing that happened. It was a pretty big deal all the way back when, in 1999. It came out in August of 99, so a little bit before the Halloween season.
Yeah.
There's a lot of places to start, but we'll start with that question about it being a, quote, horror movie or supernatural thriller. A, is there a difference to you in those things? And B, what is this?
I mean, yeah, there is a difference usually. I think when I think horror movie, I usually think of something that, I guess it'd be inherently more scary. There's a lot of people who are really obsessed with the idea that a horror film has never won Best Picture.
Is a bad thing?
Yes.
Right.
I could care less. If horror movies want to get awarded that, then they'd better be better about that. First of all,
we've talked about it at length. Even the whole criteria for what even makes a, quote, Best Picture winner is a flawed thing in anyways.
So that's the biggest problem with horror fans is their desire to be wanted makes them not wanted around, you know. So that's their problem. Is that
but every once in a few generations, a movie leaps off that says, well, maybe this one, like The Exorcist, was a huge hit in 1973. Get Out was another one.
An Academy Award for screenplay.
This was one of those types of movies, you know.
Yes.
Obviously, The Silence of the Lambs, if you want to consider that a horror movie, that's also debated, you know.
Because that's a crime movie, ultimately.
Or thriller.
Or just a drama, or thriller, yes, it's a thriller. But thriller and horror always go together. It's like they
live in the same neighborhood. I mean, they're very close.
So in that way, there's always some confusion.
Because one could argue that, like, for the most part, like, obviously Hitchcock made tons of thrillers. He only made a handful of movies that would be considered, quote, horror movies. Obviously, Psycho is one.
But one of the things...
The Birds, maybe, you know, but
one of the things that did... Frenzy's kind of another one.
Yeah.
One of the things that did impress me about this movie was how much dialogue there was and how few scares there were. It was a lot more about these two characters dealing with whatever it is in their life that's going on, you know, or their non-lives, as it turns out. Their after lives, but and kind of what does that mean? And that's the best thing about the movie is the emotionality of it, which was not something I was expecting exactly. But as far as that, yeah, I mean, it's a horror movie in the basic sense. It's about ghosts, I suppose, but it doesn't focus on the things the genre would require normally of it. So that's why it's kind of debated as that. But yeah,
I would agree with that. So again, this movie, similar to Blair Witch Project, as we said earlier, has a lot of import, had a huge reputation, has a big legacy. You went into this movie knowing the twist, knowing essentially what it's all about. How did this version of that measure up for you in terms of what your expectations were versus reality?
Well, I mean, it's very hard to watch the movie and not think about that the whole time, and then continuously point out to yourself the fact that, and spoiler in case you didn't know by now, that Bruce Willis is a ghost the whole movie after being shot at the beginning of it.
The first scene,
and that the only person he actually has any dialogue with is
Haley Joel
Osment.
Yeah.
And they hide that pretty well over the course of the movie.
Especially if you really watch this movie the first time and didn't know that, it should hypothetically be a shock. I saw this maybe 12-ish years ago for the first time, and I knew the twist going in, so of course I was looking for every little thing. But again, if you were really watching this, didn't know, it would be a surprise.
Right.
I mean, in a direct way.
Yeah, so that I can't fault the movie for that. I'm just saying that it's hard to watch the movie and not focus on.
You think that robs it a little bit of its power? Just
naturally, yes. Yeah. I mean, but that's not the movie's fault. That's not Shyamalan's fault. Yeah. Because movies should not be based on legacy. They should be based on the way they function.
Right.
And so that is just something that inevitably is going to rob my enjoyment somewhat. Mainly because I'm consistently looking at the movie that way. Yes, I'm just distracted.
Straightforwardly,
Right. So because I didn't know quite literally that he was the only one who was going to be talking to him the whole movie. I thought, there'd be other people that see him and maybe they didn't know he was a ghost. But then when I saw what happened, I was like, I guess he's not going to be able to communicate with anybody other than him. One of the things about that does slightly befuddle me somewhat is just what is the nature of what he can remember and why is he here and what has put him here. That's never really dealt with or even questioned.
Hypothetically, do you think it's to help this child with his own trauma and his own... It's to help coach him to be a better arbiter of what he's capable of doing,
Yes, and it's just kind of... There's a lot of questions about his awareness, I suppose, is what I wonder about, which doesn't really matter.
Bruce Willis's character,
which doesn't really matter, but it's still just kind of a question of, okay, what is it that... and that's partly because they have to hide that from the audience anyway, so we're not going to get to know exactly what his awareness is. But like I said, that's all just kind of just arcana that you have to deal with when watching the movie that doesn't really matter. But like I said, what I was impressed by was the emotionality of the movie, which is something I wasn't exactly expecting, that it's actually really more about a mother-son relationship, and that Bruce Willis is just kind of there, honestly, to function as that.
While also a movie about therapy, too, though.
Yeah, and it is a movie about him getting a second chance of what happened with the Donnie Wahlberg character and kind of him being able to get a redemption from beyond the grave, which is interesting.
I thought, to me, the most affecting scene in the movie is the first scene between Osment and Willis, where he's like, I know who you are, I know you're a psychologist, and you're going to try to get me to say this or that. And it's the whole scene where he's like, how about if I guess something right about you, you have to take a step forward. And that whole dialogue, I think, is terrific between both of them, and really strong character work from Osment. Obviously, he's a child actor. This is considered one of the best child actor performances of all time.
Yeah, it is really great.
I think he's even better in AI, but that movie's also asking a lot more of him and a more
and to not be totally
intellectually demanding movie. I feel like
to not totally be a human being is difficult.
And then Willis, I think, again, I'm not a Bruce Willis lover by any means. I don't really love him as an actor. I think he is quite good in this movie. He has a grace that he doesn't quite have in typically other movies he has. He also has worked with Shyamalan after this several times in Unbreakable. And then also in a little bit, in Glass was the name of that movie.
Split, technically.
Split a little bit at the end,
Dumbest end.
So he's worked with him several times in the past, or after this. But I just really love that scene, and it gets to the heart of, even when Osment steps back in that scene, he's actually weirdly giving him trust, because it's like, he say, well, that's not exactly the story, but let me tell you this thing that happened, or this thing I know. And I just think that's a really well-written scene and really well-acted scene. And that ultimately, to me, that is the most important relationship in the movie, even though the stuff between him and his mom is what's, kind of giving the most clarity amongst the human side of things.
Right.
But in terms of, and I think that's one of the mysteries of the movie, I think is, and I can't quite remember, is to what extent throughout is Osment knowing and acknowledging Willis as a ghostly presence, or has he gotten to the point where he just doesn't really make that distinction with him? It seems as though he knows something's off or different with him, but
that's
he's not
an interesting question.
He's not really he don't really break the news to him, I don't think, exactly, or hint that there's something different about Willis in an express way, but
right.
But and again, so much of the movie is about what we first know. The twist is the vacantness of Willis's life, that his wife never acknowledges him. Seems like she has a life that's going on without him, and indeed it is. And obviously that all he has at this point in his life, post that injury / what turns out to really be his death, is his work and his passion for trying to be the best child psychologist he can be, which is, of course, helping Haley Joel Osment's character throughout that, throughout his problem. But
yeah, I think, and that's another interesting device that they use, is that the ghosts can't see each other, so therefore he doesn't ever see the ghosts he's talking about.
Those
people hanging in the school, right? Yeah.
Which don't you think is a little bit of a device for us to think that Willis is a human?
Well, no, it's pretty ingenious. I mean, to say, the ghost can't see him either, so it doesn't matter. I do wonder that, though, about what is the deal as far as him and how he just kind of appears everywhere, and that's not something I think. I'm actually glad the movie's not that interested in discussing that idea. Maybe he just literally just didn't want to say anything about it, and and it didn't matter.
I do think one of the most touching moments of the movie is the very end, where you get the footage from him and his wife's wedding. And it's like him kind of finally accepting that he's dead and that he's going to move on to whatever this movie's version of afterlife looks like, or whatever.
To laugh a little bit, it's the scene you use. It's the most famous scene in the movie, but the scene you used last week where he says, "I see dead people," and even before that, Willis's whole performance in that scene, it's like his hair is coiffed a certain way, and he's like almost looking down on him. It's very weird, and he's like, "I want to tell you my secret now," and then he's like, and he's like, "I see dead people." He's like, "In your dreams?" It's almost like he's gonna freak out, but he's like trying to hold it together. He shakes his head. He's like, "When you're awake?" He's like, "When or how often?" "All the time," or whatever. But it's just funny. His whole performance in that scene is very what? This is weird.
Now,
but
go ahead.
Anyway, that's it. We mentioned that.
This again, we mentioned in the past. This is actually Shyamalan's third film. Let me just briefly go back to his Wikipedia page. So he did this movie, Praying with Anger, all the way back in 1992, which was this independent drama that he made. Wide Awake, which just looks,
I'm Wide Awake.
Looks hilariously like from a parallel universe. Like, it don't even look like who he is in a roundabout way. And then this comes out in 1999. And then, again, as someone who kind of saw half of these throughout, I really went back and saw most of them later. He dominated the film course of the 2000s in terms of, after this movie, every time one of these movies came out, and I saw some of them and then saw some of them later, they were events. He was when Signs came out in 2002, very famously, Newsweek had a cover of him standing amongst the cornfields, had his arm crossed, and said, "The next Spielberg." And so, he was believed to be this next big...
he was there for a little while.
He was, but then Nolan came along, and then
basically after, it feels like to me, after The Happening, he kind of really, and Lady in the Water, I'd
It
forgotten
was
Lady in the
around
Water
the
before
time
that.
of
The
Lady in the
Village
Water and the happening a
Yeah.
little bit at the Village, but I just want to run through these movies really quick. So, The Sixth Sense is 1999, of course. The next year, Unbreakable, was 2000.
I still haven't seen that.
That movie was, I don't
Or
think,
Signs.
financially it made good money, but I don't remember that movie quite as presently as some of these other ones. Signs was 2002. The Village was 2004.
The Village. We like The Village. I know there's a lot of people who don't, but yeah, that's good.
Lady in the Water in 2006.
Yeah, I know you said that's god awful, right? I've ever seen
Yeah, I
it.
can get to that here in a second.
Yeah.
The Happening was 2008, which I've only seen clips from, and they're some of the most hilarious things.
Cheese and
I've
crackers. Yeah.
And then, really, when The Last Airbender came out in
Yeah,
2010,
yeah.
things really went. And then that and After Earth.
Oh yeah,
was a huge, slamming into the core of the earth. The Visit, though, started to be a comeback, and I really like that movie. That's among my more favorite recent, and that's actually a found footage kind of movie.
Yeah.
That's a very polished found footage. Split,
I didn't like that,
which I mostly liked at the time. The ending was very like, are you kidding me?
Yeah, as a movie, it was mostly all right.
Or Glass, I've not still seen. Old was fine.
We like Old, yeah.
Knock at the Cabin was fine. When you look at these movies and thinking about The Sixth Sense as the beginning of them, what do you see as the sum total of that filmography? And in what ways do The Sixth Sense point out or work as a signpost for what this filmography is going to be?
Well, I guess this a very Spielbergian obsession with the supernatural's effect on the human being in various ways, and the family.
And also, like, these very, like, simplistic premises that, like, are like the world we think now, but then this thing happens and, like, is demanding you to put yourself in the shoes of these characters.
Right.
In a big way.
It's always
with the signs moving forward.
Right. It's usually always like, this is a situation has to be dealt with right now. What are you going to do? I mean,
and usually sci-fi, obviously.
Right. And it's an emergency. It's an emergency scenario usually. And so that's always kind of interesting is questioning, and that's very normal, but questioning human behavior in a crisis. And how do you react to the supernatural or the weird or whatever.
It also should be said that he's one of the few directors that has a known presence. A lot of people who don't even know about movies all that much. He is one of a handful of names.
And they say, he's the guy that does the twists, right?
Yeah,
and so, I mean, Robot Chicken kind of confirmed that a lot in the 2000s.
And I think weirdly, this movie is among his most successful movies and is among his best by far. But weirdly, might do him a disservice because ever since, almost every movie he's done has a twist to it.
Yeah.
And has that aha moment. And I wonder if instinctively...
Does Unbreakable have a twist exactly?
Yeah.
Does Signs?
Well, the big twist of Signs is just that water kills them. The aliens is basically the twist of that.
Well, I've always known that, but I didn't know that was a twist because I was
it's kind of treated as a twist in the movie.
Well, it's stupid anyway because I know people have talked about this for like 20 years, but it's kind of dumb. It's like, well, how they breathe.
Well, that would be the whole thing is that actually they're not going to be capable of taking over humanity or the world because we're a water-based planet. That's almost the twist is that they were going to be easily defeated, if that makes any sense. But I've not seen that movie in some years. I need to see it again.
But I guess my question is, how are they even breathing air? Because it's made of water.
I guess they can. I don't know. You can just look at, and that's the thing. Sometimes these logic of these movies fall apart.
Yeah.
Now I don't think this movie really does. I feel like this movie's pretty solid in that way.
Yeah.
But do you think that maybe does a disservice to him that he instinctively, and I think this happens. He doesn't even sit down and say this. This is just something that instinctively happens to artists with success is people like the thing that I made.
Right.
I'm going to do that a version of that thing again. And for him, it turned out to be sometimes these twist endings. And sometimes the movies were hampered by those twist endings.
Right.
Again, I think The Village has one of the most ingenious twists in modern movies. There's a lot of people that hate that movie and hate that twist, but I think it really works. I really like it a lot. So I'm weirdly perplexed by that. But again, I think it is fascinating that he is, and this movie obviously has a lot to do with it. This was one of the breakthroughs for him that made him a household name and made him one of the most important directors of his generation. But again, he's got a different kind of cinematic style than Nolan does. But one thing about Nolan is that he's moved beyond just exactly it being twist. Now, obviously, Nolan plays a lot with parallel timelines or memory or, you know, the way the plotting mechanics work. It kind of fits together in this untraditional way that ultimately leads to this high degree of narrative satisfaction. I feel like Oppenheimer's obviously a version of that, because that movie doesn't really have a twist, but it's just like, obviously, it plays itself like a thriller and the way it is constructed in terms of not exactly the twist, but the narrative path. And so in that way, I think Nolan kind of stole Shyamalan's spotlight and is obviously proved to be the dominant commercial blockbuster filmmaker of the last 20 plus years. What would you like to see from Shyamalan sometime soon in terms of doing something a little new and or different? Because Knock at the Cabin was his most recent movie. Yeah. And I think we liked that movie fine enough, but it didn't really leave an impression.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say that he should just totally go away from doing these kind of things, but I mean, I haven't seen The Visit, but just based on, and I know what the twist of that movie is, but based on my knowledge of that, I'm impressed by that idea of what it's working with.
I'll say in that movie, that twist actually genuinely surprised me. I was like, oh. Yeah, and then I immediately ran back the whole movie through my head, and I was like, oh, yeah. And so that one actually worked pretty good for me. Yeah. I like that a lot. That was kind of, like I said, seen as a comeback for him.
I like the twist in Old. I know a lot of people thought that was kind of dumb, but I mean, it was kind of out of nowhere and was kind of like, oh, okay, that wasn't really what I was expecting this to be.
Right.
But another thing about that movie, what I loved is like those shots of him standing up on the rock, taking pictures of him,
right?
And he's just kind of standing there, and you can't really see him, but you can tell it's him, and it's just how ominous that is.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I appreciate the types of movies that he makes to the point where I'm just interested to see whatever it would be. But I mean, I wouldn't know a specific answer or thought to what should he do exactly. I mean, in a lot of ways, Jordan Peele has kind of become that also, with particularly Us and Nope.
Where all his movies are now events, and those movies don't really rely on twists, but they rely on...
They do, sort of. Not on as big ones as he does, no. But, well, I mean, we'll think... Get Out was this idea of like, is it what's going on here?
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out what all that is this like body slavery.
You know, I guess that's true. I guess the thing about Peele is approaching things. It obviously they do have twists, but they approach things from this socio-political realm that is far stronger than what Shyamalan's using. And his movies make political statements in roundabout ways, but not with the directness of Peele. So I guess when I think of Peele, I think of somebody who's working in a genre space but is having these very socio-political statements to make that have twists within them. I suppose, just to lay it all on the cards on the table, if you're looking at it, the twist in Get Out is, of course, that the sunken place is this thing that is replaced. We're putting white minds within black bodies. Obviously, in Us, which is our personal favorite, it's the idea that actually the doppelganger is not who you thought it was the whole time, with Lupita Nyong'o's character. I guess the twist of Nope was what that. That it's like aliens in an unconventional way.
Is literally that the alien is the spaceship.
Right? Yeah, I guess that's. And so, and again, like I said though, don't you feel like Nolan and Peele have kind of stolen that? Their name on a poster. I'm going to go see that immediately. Now Shyamalan still has that for a certain older generation of cinephile.
Not for most people
now. But and his work immediately does demand interest and
his movie's based
discussion. But that he's kind of like both of those do better versions of almost what he's trying to do. I feel like, but
better than he ever did them, I think too.
Yeah, because what do you think is his strongest movie out of all the things you've seen that I listed?
Probably this or The Village. I like The Village.
There's a certain simplicity about signs that I find to be very powerful.
I want to see that. And Unbreakable, I'd like to see. I know a lot of people love it, and I know you're not that big of a fan.
So, I've talked about this any chance I get. The Lady in the Water. It's got my boy Paul Giamatti in it. I love Paul. He's my guy. You know, me and him go way back, right?
Right.
One of the most pretentious things I've ever seen. I don't use that word pretentious very often because I think it's a very weighted term and it's got a lot of associations to go with it. I really love like the vibe and the mystery it's going for is kind of cool. But it's so pretentious and so like that is the height of his arrogance as a movie like that. And he even quite literally in the movie plays this, his name's Vic Rand. He's this brilliant writer that no one understands how great he is that also lives in that apartment complex. He literally plays him in that. And I was thinking like, wow, like you really don't get it, do you? Like this is, oh my God. I kind of want to see the movie again.
Yeah.
Because I probably wouldn't hate it as much as I did the first time. But I remember really being turned off by that. And that also was not well liked, generally speaking, but I would like to actually see it again. And I would like to see The Happening because that looks like, wow, looks like something else. I'm talking
to a plastic plant, and I'm still doing it. Yeah.
But again, The Sixth Sense, you know, it feels like both its own thing and also the beginning of his cycle of movies and in a big commercial way. Obviously, it's his third movie, but I think it still really holds up. I mean, you know, I've seen it only a handful of times. I know there's a lot of people my age, cinephiles my age, that Shyamalan is not only was a big deal, but continues to be a big deal. And this movie was, for a lot of people, actually the reason they got into movies of a certain age. So I do think this movie, it shouldn't be exactly the fault of this movie, but in a modern sense, created unconsciously one of the worst tropes in movies, which is, oh, so-and-so was dead the whole time, and like I'm going to view the whole movie through that lens. Again, I think this movie does it well, but that's just a trope in theorizing and interpretations that is really bad and really overrepresented. Again, this movie does it well, so I don't think it should be totally held responsible for that, but nonetheless, it's also inspired a lot of very bad criticism and very bad interpretations of other things. But any other thoughts about The Sixth Sense?
No, it is really pretty good. I mean, for knowing what it was and all that said, I mean, it still, I thought, surprised me in ways I wasn't expecting. So
that about does it for this episode. But wait, there's more. Again, we're ending Spooktober Spooktacular.
Yeah, we're not quite to there's gold, there's frankincense, but wait, there's myrrh. We're not there yet.
Yeah, but don't worry, Noirvember coming up. Actually, first time we've done really a pair of noir movies in Noirvember. But Jeff Probst, what have we got next week?
Stay tuned for scenes from our next episode.
How was your meeting, Adam?
Oh, irritating. Foreign Policy Association.
I read that fellow's report.
Standish, yes.
I think he's full of prunes.
Well, that's the way we used to talk in the 1930s, Noah.
Standish?
The London Times man in Berlin. Yes, of course, he was quoting rumors mostly. Men drilling by night, underground meeting places, pagan rituals.
Do you believe him, Paul?
Well, anything's possible.
I'm sorry, sir, but I think it's ridiculous. Oh, there may be some fanatics, but no German in his right mind can still have a taste for war.
Do you know Germany, Mr. Rankin?
I'm sorry, I have a way of making enemies when I'm on that subject. I get pretty unpopular.
Well, we shall consider it the objective opinion of an objective historian.
Historian? A psychiatrist could explain it better. The German sees himself as the innocent victim of world envy and hatred conspired against, set upon by inferior peoples, inferior nations. He cannot admit to error, much less to wrongdoing. Not the German. We chose to ignore Ethiopia and Spain, but we learned from our casualty list the price of looking the other way. Men of truth everywhere have come to know for whom the bell tolled. but not the German. He still follows his warrior gods, marching to Wagnerian strains, his eyes still fixed upon the fiery sword of Siegfried. And in those subterranean meeting places that you don't believe in, the German's dream world comes alive, and he takes his place in shining armor beneath the banners of the Teutonic Knights. Mankind is waiting for the Messiah, but for the German, the Messiah is not the Prince of Peace. He's another Barbarossa, another Hitler.
Well, then you have no faith in the reforms that are being effected in Germany.
I don't know, Mr. Wilson. I can't believe that people can be reformed except from within. The basic principles of equality and freedom never have, never will take root in Germany. The will to freedom has been voiced in every other tongue. All men are created equal, liberté, égalité, fraternité, but in German...
There's Marx. Proletarians unite, you have nothing to lose but your chains.
But Marx wasn't a German, Marx was a Jew.
But my dear Charles, if we concede your argument, there is no solution.
Well, sir, once again, I differ.
Well, what is it then?
Annihilation. Down to the last babe in arms.
Oh, Charles, I can't imagine you're advocating a Carthaginian peace.
Well, as an historian, I must remind you that the world hasn't had much trouble from Carthage in the past 2,000 years.
Well, there speaks our pedagogue.
Speaking of teachers, Mr. Wilson.
Yes, yeah.
The faculty is coming for tea next Tuesday. If you have nothing better to do, would you like to join us?
Well, I'd like to, but my work here is finished. I'm leaving Harper tomorrow.
Michael? Yes, sir. Michael, Mr. Grisby has just told me something I'm very sorry to hear. Lover, this really concerns you more than anyone else.
Don't take your arms away.
According to George here, Michael is anxious to quit.
Comes a change in weather.
Did you know about that, lover?
No, I didn't.
Shut up, George. What's the matter, Michael? The hour's too long?
No, sir.
How about the money?
I don't care about that, sir.
So money doesn't interest you, Michael. Are you independently wealthy?
I'm independent.
Of money? Before you start that novel Elsa says you're going to write, you better learn something. You've been traveling around the world too much to find out anything about it.
That's good, Arthur.
Well, sir, I've always found it very sanitary to be broke.
That's good too, Arthur.
Shut up, George.
Money cannot bring you health and happiness, etc. Is that it? Without money, I'd be flat on my back in the ward of a county hospital. Look at this yacht. It once belonged to Jules Backrack, the great Backrack, who kept me out of his club because my mother was a Manchester Greek.
I got him on perjury. He died bankrupt. And here I am.
George.
Each man has his own idea of happiness, of course.
I haven't got a match.
But money is what all of us have in common. Take Bessie here. She used to work for Backrack.
I pay her more, don't I, Bessie?
Yes, Mr. Bannister.
Her salary means happiness.
It means a home. 3 rooms for 2 families. Bessie's a grandmother and a widow, and only one of the boys is working. Isn't that right, Bessie?
Yes, sir.
Yes, of course it is. So Bessie goes to church every Sunday she gets off, and prays to God she'll never be too old to earn the salary I pay her. You call yourself independent.
Come around and see me 5 years from now.
Aye, aye, sir.
Sing it for us again, lover.
So those 2 movies you heard from are both Orson Welles noirs, first of which was The Stranger from 1946, and The Lady from Shanghai from partially 1947, but also 1948, I think is when it came out in America. It came out in 47, I think, in France, and then 48 here.
Yeah, okay.
Had a troubled production. Orson Welles.
Doesn't it end in, like, San Francisco? Like, ain't that the end of the movie? When they hit on that? It's just kind of funny. It's like it was in America.
Yeah, I think, and we can get into this next week. I think this was the beginning of the end for Orson Welles in Hollywood in a big way, and that had been building for a while, obviously, as we know. It says it's in New York City, Shanghai. Oh, yeah, San Francisco via the Panama Canal. Yeah, it is. It does end there, I believe.
Yeah, anyway, that doesn't really matter.
But Columbia Pictures was the one that funded. Orson Welles. I don't know. Have we ever done any Orson Welles movies officially on the pod? I'm trying to think.
We talked about F for Fake, I think, when we watched it, maybe, and we talked about Citizen Kane.
We talked about Other Side of the Wind recently, I remember, too, and then in the past.
The French literally is when he wanted to release this movie, I guess.
Orson Welles, I think he has a decent argument in terms of being among maybe the top 5 most fascinating directors of all time. Definitely one of the most interesting stories of a creative in filmmaking ever.
He's one of the people I'd love to listen to just talk forever.
Yeah, he had an amazing voice, obviously.
Yeah, or even the things he talk about, too.
Right.
But his
and
voice,
also the circles he was a part of. He lived a very charmed life in terms of all the places he was able to go and things he was able to be a
even
part
after his
of.
career had kind of destroyed itself, he still was. People held him up and talked about him, and he was still able to work. And
nothing else. You take everything else away, he will always be the guy who directed Citizen Kane, which is, of course, one of the most iconic, beloved films of all time. So
which
that
is to say nothing of the rest of the film.
Right, and that's the thing is I think that was the first thing of him I would have seen. But, I continually am wowed by other modes and things he's done. I think Chimes at Midnight is one of the greatest movies of the 60s. I think it's one of his best movies. It's just a powerhouse of a movie. I think a lot of both of these movies not Out of the Past, the other noir he did in the 50s,
Touch of Evil.
Touch of Evil is
Touch
clear. Touch of Evil's among his great movies. Other Side of the Wind, which only came out a few years ago, is terrific. This guy just continually
F for Fake. I'm a big fan of.
Reinvented himself and did new things and always found new ways to be interesting and do new things. Mm-hmm. He was a terrific actor. Also,
Magnificent Ambersons is all right mostly.
Obviously, he's a terrific actor. You take The Third Man, which he didn't even direct, but he's in. He's amazing in that. You can't say enough good things about Orson Welles in terms of as an artist and as a creative. So he's among the most interesting directors who's ever lived.
He's made some Shakespeare. Obviously, Chimes at Midnight is basically a Shakespeare thing, but some direct Shakespeare adaptations. Yeah, so he came from the world of theater, and then he, of course, translated into radio, and then he got into movies. So, he did a little bit of everything. Didn't he even have a voice in Transformers, the movie? Was he Megatron, I think? So The Stranger and Lady from Shanghai are both noirs he did in the late 40s. You've seen Lady from Shanghai, right? Yes.
Yeah, and not seen The Stranger.
So long, fella.
What I love about The Stranger, to briefly talk about that, it's one of the best depictions. No,
actually, he was Unicron. Sorry.
Okay, sorry to you Transformers fans.
Not Megatron, Soundwave, or Rumble. That was Frank Welker.
But he made The Stranger in 1946.
When you wake up and you've seen 55 Frank Welker films, never even heard of him. Actually, I've heard of him. But
he's a voice actor.
Right.
The Stranger is one of the best depictions of post-World War II era America I've seen in a movie. I think, glass half full version is It's a Wonderful Life. Glass half empty version is this.
And then somewhere in there's Best Years of Our Lives.
Yeah, that's kind of in the middle. Yeah. But as far as the lingering fascism of the era, I think that it's a great depiction of. The movie also is famous for including some of the very first Holocaust footage that was ever put into a major movie, obviously.
Yep.
It's been right after that, and it's not all that graphic, but the fact that it's in any way in a Hollywood movie was a shocking thing to see.
I wonder, and just a question I have in general, I wonder how much of that stuff made it into newsreels in America at the time. I don't know how much of that they would have been willing to show.
Well, I know there's a lot of stuff that was shot that was not seen for years, that was showed at the Nuremberg trials and stuff that was not.
That Samuel Fuller filmed, because Samuel Fuller went into a lot of those camps when he was in the army, and he filmed a lot of that. Some of the stuff they used, not all of it, obviously, but And then there was stuff that the Nazis also had filmed they didn't burn in time that they would have found.
Right.
That's in Night and Fog mostly.
But there's been a lot of talk about fascism over the last decade or more, about decade-ish. I think this is not necessarily like, oh, go back to this movie and we can figure out how to fight fascism. Not that kind of thing. But a brutal, necessary reminder that fascism was not defeated at the end of World War II, in case you needed a reminder about that or didn't know that or understand that. I think it's actually got one of my all-time favorite Edward G. Robinson performances also. He's not like the Edward G. Robinson of Little Caesar or of like the 30s. I mean, it's him playing a pretty straight character.
And then in the 70s, the government was like, no, it's the beginning. They put in Rico into effect, but anyway.
But I think it's like a really terrific...
Took him a while to get there,
Edward G. Robinson performances. He plays a very straight man detective type. And I really love the interplay between him and Orson Welles in this. And Orson Welles is this charming, handsome... snake oil salesman fascist is something that I think is among his most understated but good, worthwhile performances of his career,
and his willingness to do that to himself.
Right?
At the
Yeah,
time.
I mean, absolutely, that's something to be said. Lady from Shanghai. Now I know you've seen this, and I've seen it. It's been a while. This is among the wackiest noirs I've ever seen.
It's so weird.
I mean,
it's different.
It's saying a lot because there's a lot of wacky noirs around this time. Has one of the most iconic endings to a movie of all time in the Hall of Mirrors, which I think I might have told this story before on here. The first time I ever saw that, I happened to be like channel surfing, landed on Turner Classic Movies, and saw that scene, and it was like, what is this? Like it was years ago before I'd seen it. So strange. And the voice in it, which was his voice, the narration that ends the movie, sounded a lot like Brain from Pinky and the Brain. I was like, and I literally thought, oh, is that the same actor? Like voicing it? And then I would come to find out that, oh no, like Brain is a Orson Welles homage. And then that's probably the first time I ever figured out in any meaningful way who Orson Welles was. And so that's just funny to me. But
what's funny about that ending too, and we'll talk about it next time. But it's weird enough, and then you've got Everett Sloan, just how weird he looks as a person.
Yeah.
Like, all these mirrors of him everywhere, and it's just like, what am I looking at? Like,
I think that was towards the end of Orson Welles and Rita Hayworth's marriage as well. I think it was starting to fall apart.
Yeah.
So it is a weird reflection of that, too. Also, one of the all-time memorable accents is him in this movie with his Irish accent and just
and something that has lived on for so long, and we'll put the audio of it in next time.
Yeah,
is Glenn Anders is that one guy in this, that George Grimsey character, where he's like, "So long, fella," and then walks out of frame, and the music's like, real big. That was something that was a big college joke that all my roommates and I used to laugh about all the time, because I remember I was watching that on DVD there. That's when I saw it was in college, and we were all like, what? Like, and we used to play that all the time over and over and over. But, I'm really interested to see The Stranger because I haven't seen that. And Lady from Shanghai I'll be interested to revisit because Lady from Shanghai is kind of one of the preeminent noirs, which you don't normally think. Some people do think of him as a noir filmmaker because a lot of people...
he's definitely, made some of the biggest things.
But, like... A lot of people think of Citizen Kane as a noir, though, sort of, which I don't think it is exactly.
Not exactly, but
it's
kind of a proto-noir. Noir,
because of it as a mystery and just the visuals of... Well, he just had... I think that also goes... kind of takes away from the fact of what a massive influence that Orson Welles has had on cinema in general. So it's kind of like, well, of course he had an influence on noir. He had an influence on movies. So it's kind of like, But no, there is a direct link there.
Yeah, but in particular, like the moral ambiguity of that era, he definitely fed into in a very big, direct way. So, I've enjoyed all these recent movies, but I'm glad to get back to the 40s, I'm glad
I want to do something
to the
different.
past. So,
get the hell away from all these ghosts and goblins and freak-a-leaks and witches and Blackie and Killers of the Flower Moon, all the monsters that we come to know and love. Literally, I said this yesterday, we were talking about, the other day when we saw it, that he literally looked like Bela Lugosi mixed with like Paul Muni, that guy, the Blackie guy, and we were laughing about it earlier today. We were watching that scene. It was in a trailer where he's like, I need you to tell me what you told him. He's like, I told him all of it. He's just like, oh, I could give a F what happens to you. I told him everything. I don't care.
What does he say too? He's like, get a pencil or.
Well, no, that's the other guy. The other guy.
Yeah.
The more redneck guy, which one of my favorite lines in Blair Witch Project was when they look at the cairns that are outside all the stones piled up.
Yeah.
And it's kind of an aside that the Mike guy says. He's like, oh, rednecks ain't that creative or something.
Yeah.
But he says something like, they're basically, he's like, well, all this is going to come down on my neck.
Yeah.
And they're like, and he's like, get a pencil. Well, he's like, oh, I'll tell you what happened. Yeah. But yeah, anyway.
But this is another wrap up of Overlapping Dialogues' third annual Spooktober Spooktacular. Hope you all have a very safe and happy Halloween. This is Kyle.
This is Levi.
Take care. God bless.
It's the horror of Halloween. It's WCW like you've never seen. The man becomes the monster when the immortal Hulk Hogan and the mysterious giant lock up in a sumo monster truck match. Then the monster becomes the man when these two colossal forces bring it to the ring for the World Heavyweight title. WCW presents Halloween Havoc. Sunday, October 29th. Live and only on pay-per-view.